You can send her the phone off. You don't have more meetings.
You can just, you just don't have to go straight, whatever you want, we'll call it a day.
If you want to move that in. They're already sending it. I think he is.
I'm just playing with them. It's a complaining. And it's gonna be said to us either way. Good and Tom job and my job.
Who are you gonna? Hey, Tanya.
We're gonna all drive over everything.
Show up on behalf.
Recommission meeting. Yeah, after a couple minutes of- So it's going to. Need something up there.
Public comment.
They're on.
Fine.
He's already.
Is Sarah on?
Yeah.
She's on.
A little bit more.
You're max.
Test.
Commissioner Pete.
Yeah, we can start.
Commissioner Howell.
Pick it up as. He'll be on that. Go ahead. Robin, ready? Good.
All right.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. Test. Good morning. Okay.
All right, Chairman and Commission, good morning. Today, we're going to have a compensation workshop. Sheena will start us off and kind of give the background of why we're here today and what we're going to talk about. And then also we have a consultant on board today that's going to get up and talk about process of how we arrived at the conclusions that we're going to discuss. So Sheena, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. As Tom mentioned, we're going to be talking about compensation. We do have a long day scheduled, but really our objective of today is to have good conversation and dialogue with the commission and what staff is recommending moving forward with our compensation plans. And this not only includes the general compensation plan, but other plans as well. We went out for an RFP bid for a contractor to help us review our compensation plan on the general pay plan. You might recall in 2022, we made lots of adjustments to all of the other pay plans. So with that, we awarded that bid to Evergreen, and we have our consultant here. This is Mark Holcomb, and I'll introduce him here in just 1 second, who helped us with this process. So we have been working with Evergreen for many, many months. I first want to say Evergreen is well known in this profession. They've been around for almost 20 years. They work exclusively with municipalities and counties and have conducted over 900 compensation studies, many of those in the state of Kansas. So they are well versed in how governments work and how compensation plans work. So we are excited to have one of those employees, Mark Holcomb, with us today. And I will tell you, we are very lucky with the timing because we got him about 10 days out from his wife having a baby. So he has a newborn at home, but he was able to join us. So we're very excited. He's here today to walk through the plan, to answer any questions that you have or processes that we have gone through that you'd like to know more about. I also want to give acknowledgement to our compensation team that has been working on this project for many, many months and countless hours. Anna Meyerhoff-Cole, who is our deputy CHRO, Bethany Corral, which is our director of compensation and classification, and Lori and Showalter Airy, who is our budget director. And we have worked together, again, countless hours going through compensation plans, job descriptions, talking with departments, talking with employees, finding out exactly what they do within their positions to help us better create a more marketable and applicable compensation plan. On here. So with that, you will see that we have an agenda out today, and we're first going to start off by walking through what our evergreen compensation study shows. Last week, I gave you a heads up in the form of a draft report of what we will talk about, what we will be suggesting for the commission to review. We'll next talk about our compensation and financial impact, more from the Division of Human Resources and the Division of Finance, of how these recommendations actually impact our organization. And then finally, we will talk about additional compensation topics that the commission has asked us to review. And those include paid time off, or PTO, bilingual pay, the 2024 observed or paid holidays, and paid parental leave. So those will come in the afternoon. Again, we've given you those guidelines on the agenda, but a lot of the timing will be dictated on your interactions and suggestions back and forth. So any questions before we start?
Any questions? Don't see any?
Okay, so with that, I am going to turn this over to Mark, and he's going to walk you through the evergreen portion of the compensation study.
Good morning, Mark.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And good morning, everybody. I appreciate you having me here and give me the chance to walk you through sort of the whole process from beginning to end of the compensation study that we've been conducting. I do want to give a thank you as well to your HR team. They've been excellent partners, and really they've done a lot of the work here on this side. It really makes the process more successful when we do have an engaged and hardworking partner on this side. So as we get started, I do want to talk a little bit about, the overview here, what we want to talk about. We'll have the study goals and really the project phases. Both of those will be a little bit of review that will talk about where we started the process, what were the steps that we took to get to this point? What were we looking to do with a compensation and classification study like this? We'll talk about the employee meetings and the current system review as well. Those two items really get into what's going on at the county right now. Before we came and made any recommendations, what are the things that are going well? What are the things that employees have some concerns about? Where did we identify some areas that we may want to make some recommendations on? Even before we get to the survey responses that we got, the compensation survey, the data, the information that we returned from there. So that'll end us when we get to the next steps. We'll really talk about what are the recommendations that we had, what do we believe the best next steps would be for you all to go forward at the end of this study. With the study goals that we have here, there's really two main things that we tried to keep in mind throughout the entire compensation and classification study. Reviewing the compensation systems for internal equity as well as for external equity. Those are really two main goals we try to keep in mind throughout. So the first thing we talk about is the internal equity. Internal equity refers to really how positions relate to one another within the county. Even before you get into looking at your peers, looking at the market, seeing whether or not you're competitive with other organizations, the internal equity is going to refer to, are your positions placed appropriately as compared to one another? If you have a position that is operating in the same exact way as another position, they have similar complexity, similar duties, similar responsibilities, but they just happen to be in a different department, we would expect to see that their compensation is very similar because, again, they have those same qualifications you would essentially put on each position. If we look at a position and we say, hey, these are relatively similar, but this position actually has more complexity or more leadership, we would expect to see the position with the higher level of complexity and leadership actually compensated at a higher level. So that is something that we try to keep in mind, even beyond looking at the market, is we have to make sure the system makes sense internally based on the way that you utilize your positions, not just on how your market peers do. Looking at the external equity, though, is critical because, of course, you're recruiting in a labor market against other organizations. You have to pull in employees, you have to retain your employees, and you have to give them a competitive wage versus what they can get in the market. And so those two factors really come together and allow us to make recommendations that'll give you an internally and externally equitable system. And so what that means is it's not as simple as going to the market and saying, well, the average pay for this position is $45,000. So let's set the pay equal to exactly $45,000. We may find that your position operates a little bit differently here. So we may recommend that the position, if it's a little bit less complex as the market peers, it may start at $42,000 instead of $45,000. Alternatively, sometimes we'll find that, hey, your position actually has some additional responsibilities or complexities that we didn't see in the market. In order to avoid compression internally, we may recommend $46,000, $47,000. So the market is a big driver of pay, but it is not the only factor that goes in. So looking at the project phases, then from beginning to end of the engagement, phase one is really the outreach phase. It's all about engagement, data collection, and really helping us to learn about your organization. So at the beginning there, you'll see employee meetings as well as data collection of the JATs, which is one of the job surveys that we sent out to employees here. So all the employees that were included in this study were sent a job survey where they were actually able to give us information talking about what are their tasks, what are their duties, what are their responsibilities that they perform on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. So with that data collection from employees, that was their opportunity to let us know if they felt like their job description didn't fully capture the duties that they are responsible for. We want to know that. That's one of the purposes of a classification study is really to determine, does the county have these employees classified correctly? Yes or no. And so with that data collection from employees, it's not just that we would pull information from HR and collect the job descriptions and the org charts, et cetera. We would actually collect information directly from employees as well. So we have the most up-to-date and the most current information available. The employee meetings that we hosted, we did have to move those to a virtual meeting, setting in the beginning of the engagement. We hosted dozens of virtual meetings where we did meet with different departments, different employees, gave the employees the opportunity to share with us their thoughts, their concerns, any of the information that they wanted to provide to us about what are the things that, again, that they liked about working here, what did they view as the strengths of employment with the county, as well as the concerns that they had as well. And so phase one sort of wrapped up with the end of those surveys that were collected from employees. We did host, again, those focus group meetings. We met directly with department heads as well to solicit their feedback on their priorities for the engagement. That took us into phase two. So phase two is about us turning all that data we collected into something we can use, really studying the job surveys, studying the job descriptions, all of the information that we collected in phase one. We read through, every bit of that. Every single job survey was read individually by a consultant at Evergreen to help us understand your organization. We do something called the assessment of current conditions in phase two, which we'll talk a little bit about in a moment. We'll share some results from that. So the assessment of current conditions actually is going to allow us to look at your current pay scales, see whether or not there's some compression in those scales, see if we have any concerns, even before we go to the market. If we identify something that we say, hey, this probably isn't exactly how it's supposed to look, and probably in an ideal world, we would see things a little bit differently. So we'll talk about the results from that in a moment. At the end of phase two, once we feel, and really before phase two ends, a little bit concurrently there, but as phase two is winding down, as we feel we do have a good grasp on your organizational structure, we do move to phase three, which is the compensation, the external analysis versus the market. We do have to do phase two first, because obviously to make accurate comparisons to the market, we have to feel that we understand the surveys, the jobs, the descriptions that we've received from your organization. So going into phase three, then that market analysis is where we make the comparisons and collect the information from your peers. And so that includes us going out with select benchmark jobs that we identified to make direct comparisons to those market peers. We review job descriptions. So it's not just a title match alone. We don't just say, well, this title and that title are similar. It actually gets into the duties and responsibilities in the job descriptions at your peer organizations, but we also use the job surveys from your employees again, so that we are using the most current and up-to-date information possible. With those comparisons in that compensation, the external comparison to the market, we use that to bring back a picture of, are you at market? Are you below market? Are you above market in some positions, some areas? And we really bring everything from phase 2 and 3 together into phase 4 for the recommendations. So with phase 4, we do have recommendations, and we'll share some of those today. We'll talk about, what do we believe you all would need to do to update your system to be, again, with the highest level of internal and external equity that's possible. We do have in phase 4 reporting. It includes things like this, where we come out in person, we share this information. It includes things like the draft report that you've seen. Depending on the feedback that we get today, depending on the direction that we decide to go, we can make an update to that and essentially make sure that captures everything that we've done during the engagement so that that report can be shared publicly to the preference of the county. However you all would like to share that, that is something that you'll have available for you. But again, that reporting is really just to make sure everybody is aware and understands exactly what we did and what we felt were the steps necessary to get us to this point in the recommendations. So with the employee meetings, I'm going to circle back there and talk a little bit about what we heard from your employees. We did have a lot of meetings, and so we obviously generated a lot of comments. Many of them positive and certainly some concerns as well. But to start with the positive comments, the things where we'd ask questions like, what is it that attracted you to working for the county in the first place? What is it that has kept you here? For those employees who've been here for 5, 10, 15 plus years, why are you still here? Why have you not gone somewhere else? So one of the main things that we did hear from employees was benefits. Sometimes employees just say, hey, the benefits package is fantastic. I love it. Sometimes they highlight specific benefits. And sometimes they say, you know what, the benefits package here is probably better than I could get at a private organization. That's a common thing people say is, you know what, I'm actually making a little less money than when I, used to work at a private company, but the benefits here can't be beat. The healthcare is better. I've started a family. I've got a little bit better work-life balance, things of that nature. Employees were quick to point that out. I think that's probably the number one thing employees share, that, hey, this is what we like. This is what we appreciate. And this is why we're still here. Another one that we did hear a lot, though, was the culture. And that gets into the people that are working here. It gets into, some employees mentioned their coworkers, said, hey, I've got a great team I'm working with. I really feel like I'm working on a team that shares my values, that we're really after the same thing, whether that be that service environment, whether it be the specialization of the department. They said, hey, I'm working in a department with people who care about the same things I care about. And some did mention their supervisors as well, talked about, I feel like I'm respected by my supervisor. I feel like I've got an environment here that I wouldn't want to leave. But the third thing that people mentioned, again, is the schedule. And so with that schedule, people did talk about things like weekends off, things like having a set schedule, particularly some of the employees lower on the pay scale. They may have some other options that might get them some additional pay. They may have some options where they could say, hey, I could go work at this store or this restaurant. Maybe I'd make a little more as a waiter. Maybe I'd make a little more, X, Y, or Z. But I'd be working nights. I'd be working weekends. I'd be working overtime. And the schedule here allows me to do some other things that I really couldn't do in a different type of occupation. So that's something that employees did share and point out as well. As we go to the concerns, I think the concerns were pretty focused as well. There were a few things that we've heard a lot about. And the first one was external equity. That's not unexpected. It's a compensation study, so employees know why we're here. And so I think compensation is the first thing on their mind. But that being said, there definitely were concerns where employees said, hey, I don't think my position pays what I could get elsewhere. Sometimes employees come and they have specific examples and they say, hey, look, I looked at the market. Here's what they pay somewhere else. I need you to pay me that much money. And of course, we say, hey, we're just starting off the study. We're not going to make any recommendations yet, but I appreciate the enthusiasm and the employees wanting to go out and do that research. So employees did, sometimes they had specific examples. Sometimes they had stories or anecdotes where they said, hey, my friend and I do the exact same thing. He works at a private company. I work here and he makes more. Those are common things that we hear. And even sometimes people did reference, again, other governments. They said, hey, I think they pay more at this city. I think they pay more across the state at this county. We're not competitive. We're not where we're supposed to be. That was something that employees shared. I have some data to talk about that. So again, this is just perceptional at this point, but that is something that employees talked about. Another thing that they did mention, and employees typically don't use words like internal equity, but they talked about some things that I would say classify and fall under that category. Employees talk about, hey, is the equity there between my position and another position? That is a common thing we hear where an employee says, hey, I think my position does just as much as that person's position, but they get paid more. Or, hey, I think my position, it gets paid more than the employees who report to me, but barely more. I don't think there's enough space between my position and the other employees that report to me. Those are some of the things that we heard. We did hear people talking about, hey, I'd like to see some additional pay, not even versus the market, just, hey, if I get an additional certification or if I have some additional education that somebody else doesn't have, it's not fair that we make the same amount of money. So we did have some people talking about things like that. But again, mainly it's comparison between different positions where employees say this position's worth more than that position. So why are we being paid about the same? That's the employee perception that we hear a lot about. And then the last thing that we did hear about was employees talking about, you know what, hey, if we do a compensation study, if we get where we're supposed to be, we need to make sure that we're going to stay there. You know, I'm concerned that we might come back, we might get to the right place here, and we may not keep it up over time. We may not continue to maintain the market position that we get as a result of this study. Talking about the year over year raises, I think it's an easy thing to look at right now. It's not always the case in the market. Certainly you can look, you know, after 2008 and say, hey, there probably weren't as many raises being given out following that recession that we went into there, or depression. But you are, you know, now in this market that we've been in for the past several years, every one of your peers has been raising their pay. You know, they've been saying, hey, we're in a competitive job market, we're in a competitive environment, we're going to raise the pay year over year. It's always going to vary. Some years there's going to be a lot of movement. Some years there's going to be a little bit less, but it is important to watch that over time. And that's something that employees were quick to emphasize. And it is something that I think will be important. We'll talk about it at the end of the engagement, or at the end of the presentation today as well. With the current system review, this is again something we call the assessment of current conditions. In that draft report, you would have seen some of this highlighted and spelled out right there in that chapter in the report. But a couple of strengths that we wanted to highlight: the current pay scales that the county has, they make sense. They're good pay scales. There's a logical progression there. I believe that difference between the minimum and the maximum of each range. So we call that the range spread. It's consistent throughout. You're not going to see some positions having, you know, significantly wider ranges than others. You've also got a logical progression between grades. So as you walk up the pay scale, you've got that consistent progression, which does allow your HR staff to assign positions where they need to be in the market. Some organizations, they have some big gaps there. If you have, you know, 15 or 20% between two grades, it can be hard to figure out exactly where a position should be versus the market. So we like that, you know, in your current scales. You also have a very strong positive relationship between pay grade penetration and tenure. And so what that means is, not in every single case, but what that means is you're going to see most of the employees who are new are going to be towards the beginning of the pay scale, so closer to their range minimum. Most of the employees who have been with the organization for a long time are going to be further through the range, to the midpoint, closer to the maximum, et cetera. That's not something you want for every single employee in the entire county. So to be clear, sometimes we may want to hire somebody in, you know, above the minimum. Sometimes somebody may not advance as quickly as a result of performance or other concerns. But that being said, in general, we typically find it a pretty strong rule that your employees, the longer that they're here, the more productive they're going to be, the more effective and efficient in their jobs they're going to be. And so we would expect that they're going to see that progression over the course of their career. We did find that for the most case here. Some of the weaknesses, though, again, the first one, I don't even know if we'll necessarily call it a weakness with the compensation structure, but it's definitely something we want to point out. You do have a significant number of employees below the midpoint of the pay range. So about 2/3 of your employees are below the midpoints of the ranges. As we just said a moment ago, if you've got a brand new employee, they would expect to be below the midpoint. That's okay for them to be below the midpoint. So it's not that I'm saying, I don't want anybody to hear me say today, 2/3 of your employees are below where they're supposed to be. That's not the point we're making. But it is something for the county to be aware of. It can mean that you've had a little bit more turnover than we would typically see. It can mean that you've had some expansion, some new jobs, some hires. But again, you've got a lot of employees who have not been here for 10, 15, 20 years. You don't typically expect to see it 50-50 above the midpoint and below the midpoint. So we're not looking for a 50-50 number there. But 2/3 is a little higher than we like to see. Maybe 55%, maybe up to 60% is sort of where you'd like to see it. So again, that 2/3 number, 66%, I think for sure is a little higher than we would probably want. And something that can be looked at and corrected over time. It's not that we would say today, raise everybody above the midpoint or anything like that. But it's something to look at and for you all to be aware of. The next thing that we did want to identify is there's a little bit of compression. Again, not an extreme problem. This is not something that we look at and say, oh my gosh, this is one of the worst compression problems we've seen, but it's definitely something that we noticed. And there are two types of compression. I just slipped to this slide so I can kind of talk about a little bit of both of those. One type of compression is what we'll call range compression. So it's within a pay range. If somebody has been at the organization or in their position for 15 or 20 years, they would expect to be at the midpoint or above. They'd expect to be moving through that pay range if they still find themselves close to the minimum. they're making the same amount as your new hires. Somebody coming into the organization who's got 2 or 3 years and they've got 15 or 20, that's compression. We would say, hey, this person, absent other factors, absent performance concerns, or absent any other factor there, we would say that employee is probably a little bit behind where they're supposed to be. They're not seeing the progression that they would have expected. The other kind of compression that we identified and again saw a little bit of was rank compression. And so what that means is employees at different levels within the organization and the salaries are not sufficiently differentiated. So think of the easiest example here is a supervisor and an employee that reports to them. If their salaries are almost exactly the same, that means you're not compensating that supervisor for the additional leadership complexity, for the additional responsibility that they have, not only for their own position, but for the positions reporting to them. Again, you can think of examples where it might make sense if you've got a brand new supervisor and you've got somebody who's in the lower level position who's been here for 30 years. It may make sense for there to be a little bit of compression in some cases. But in general, we would hope to see some spacing between those positions, again, to respect that leadership and complexity that you're going to have with that supervisor position. So while we did identify some of that, again, not a crippling issue, but definitely something that we feel could be looked at and could be addressed. With the compensation survey then, so everything I've talked about to this point has been internal focused, perceptional in nature, some of the feedback by employees. Obviously, the AOCC is data driven, but now I want to move to the market. I do want to talk about the external environment that you find yourself competing in, looking for talent, and really trying to recruit and retain your employees in. So we did compare to 16 different organizations here. They're listed over there to the side. A number of those organizations are within the state and some in the surrounding states as well. That does mirror. It was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, my introduction. We've done a number of studies in Kansas and in the Midwest in the last few years. This mirrors what we typically do there. We do like to look at the wider labor market, but we do understand when you're comparing to a different state or even across the state, you are going to have to adjust for cost of living. So that is something we looked at as well. The cost of living adjustments were done by looking at data sourced from the Council for Community and Economic Research. That is a national cost of living source that we probably use most frequently in our studies. It gives us good data on a basket of goods and services that you would expect to be able to purchase, that you would expect to have to purchase, within your local area to make sure that your salaries are reflective of the area that you're living, working, and employing, people in. So what that means is it looks at things like gas, it looks at things like, groceries, milk, hamburger meat, things of that nature. It also looks at housing, rent, healthcare, all of the types of things that employees would be looking to spend their money on, to make sure that if we compare you to a higher cost of living area, we're not going to artificially raise your salary just because we happen to pick a bunch of peers that are in a higher cost of living area. It also means if we compare to a lower cost of living area, we're not going to artificially deflate your salaries. We're not going to say to the employees, well, they're making, 50,000 over there, so you should be happy with 50,000 here. We know that a dollar doesn't go the same distance everywhere. So we wanted to normalize that, make sure everything that we gave you was in terms of your local spending power here. With the comparisons to the market, we looked at 156 different positions. So as I mentioned, we identified, select positions to go to the market. Not every single position was compared. That 156 position sample, that really gives us a very good idea of where your pay is in every department, in every area, in every job family, to make sure that when we make a statement, when we make a recommendation for a particular position, we're able to say this is a market competitive wage. For any position that was not directly compared to the market, we use that internal equity to set the pay. And so as an example, again, with just generic positions, if you've got a finance specialist and analyst and manager and assistant director and director, you don't have to survey all 5 of those positions to find out where they're going to fit. If you've got the specialist and the manager, you can figure out where that analyst might fit in between them by using internal equity. So that's the way that we did make a recommendation that does have a market component for every single position included in the study, even though those 156 were the focus of the direct comparisons to the market. We did return an average match count of about 7.5 matches per position. Some of the more generic or commonly found positions in the market, again, had a dozen or more matches. Some of the positions that are more specialized, we did have a lower response count on some of those. But that did give us more than 1,000 points of comparison between your organization and your peers. Each one of those, again, was reviewed by our market team individually to make sure that we are comfortable with the match, with the data that was provided to us from your peer organizations. And so we do feel very confident and comfortable with the results that we brought back. With those results, then there's two different essentially pairs or sets of results that are set up there. On the left-hand side of the page or the left-hand side of the table up there, you will notice the unadjusted results. And so what that means is if we take the salary that's advertised here in the county, if we take the salary that's advertised at your peers, you are paying about 10% less than your peers are on average. And so what that means is, again, if you take a $50,000 job, if the market's offering 50,000, you might be offering 45,000. Again, that's on average. There are positions that came back significantly further below the market, and there are positions that came back in a much stronger position as well. When you compare 156 positions, we are absolutely not making the statement that every single position was exactly the same. But on average, we did identify that market gap there. But I do want to emphasize too, when you go over to the right-hand side of the page, if you adjust for cost of living, if you adjust those matches to make sure that we're looking at a true apples to apples comparison, we did find you about 5% below the market. So again, it gets a little bit better. It's not quite as straightforward as just saying you're 10% below the market. Again, with that adjustment, we did find you about 5% below the market on average. Once again, some positions will be a little further below than that, some positions a little bit stronger. And so that 5% number is what we'll sort of use to represent the overall picture, but it does not mean every single position was exactly the same. With that 5% number, it is important to note that as we're looking to make these recommendations and going forward into the next fiscal year, as we're making recommendations again for the future, not for the past, the 5% represents where you are right now. We do expect your peers are going to move their ranges at least a little bit this next year. Again, that's been the pattern that we've been seeing. That's what we are projecting. So if you were to come in and again, not that we're recommending this, but give a 5% flat adjustment, we would expect you would still be 2 or 3% below the market as you move the 5% to catch up and your peers continue to move along beyond you. So do want to emphasize that point to make sure we're all looking at the same numbers and that projection there. So with that being said, our recommendations, sort of everything that we've talked about up to this point, it sort of boils down to here to make sure we're talking about the same thing here. So we are recommending adopting a new pay plan to govern the general employees included in this study. It does have 30 pay grades, but it does still it still leverages the strengths that we identified in your previous system. We've got consistent range spreads. We've got a consistent progression from one grade to the next. It does start at $15 an hour. That's about where we saw the market, but it also aligns very well with a living wage here in the county. It does look at, if employees were going to be if they're making their salary and that salary is going to, allow them to live here. Again, that's an added bonus that we saw. It is a market competitive salary that we're recommending, but it does align with that living wage in the county as well, which again, we felt was definitely an added bonus to that recommendation there. That's where the pay range starts. That's what the pay range looks at. But once you have a pay structure, so you've got your 30 grades, you've got your consistent, setup and structure. How do you figure out where the positions are supposed to go? Well, number two, we assigned pay grades to each one of your positions utilizing both internal and external equity. So again, as I've sort of emphasized from the beginning, I'll do a little callback to that here and make sure we emphasize again, the pay grade assignment that we gave was heavily driven by market. But there were times when we said, hey, we might have recommended this grade to go into grade 55. But if we do grade 55, that's going to have a little bit of compression with another position. Let's move them to grade 54, as an example. So there were bumps both up and down based on the internal equity, which again means that the market was a big driver of placement. We do believe this is a very market competitive system, but there will be examples where an employee would either be, slotted one grade above or below potentially based on an internally identified relationship. So with the grades assigned in, so we take the positions, we take every position, in the organization that we're studying here, we assign them to a pay grade. How do you determine what pay an employee is supposed to get? If an employee is currently making $50,000, if the newly recommended salary range, goes from $45,000 to $65,000, they're in the range. Does that mean they just keep their current salary and we do nothing else? We don't make a change at all. We do have a recommendation for that with an implementation option that we are recommending of the hybrid parity model. So I'm going to take a moment and kind of explain exactly what that means, because I know, hybrid parity model may not be something that you're all familiar with. But what the hybrid parity model does is it actually looks at giving a projected salary that we would expect a generic employee to make based on their time with the county overall and their time in their current position. So we look at both of those factors to figure out where we think an employee should be. And so the reason we look at both of those factors is, of course, if somebody's been here with the county, if they've been serving, they've been working here for 10, 15, 20 years, it's important to recognize that they have some of that knowledge they've attained, their experience working here. They understand how the county works. They understand the systems they've been serving. And so that is an important thing to recognize. But that being said, if an employee is just promoted, and let's just take an extreme example, if somebody's been at the county for 20 years and they promote the day before we make these recommendations, they have one day in their current job. We don't want to say, well, they've been here 20 years, let's move them to the maximum of the range, because they just started that new job. They've got a lot to learn. They've got a lot that they're going into that job. We really want to make sure we also look at their time in current position. And so for those employees, we do focus most heavily on time in current position, but all of the time spent at the county would be credited at a 50% rate. So essentially, if you spent 20 years here, you got a promotion, we'll give you 10 years of credit for that, because we want to recognize the work, the experience. We want to recognize all of those skills and the knowledge and abilities that they're bringing into that position. But we don't have to reflect it at a one-to-one rate. So what it does is it essentially says from minimum to maximum pay range, where would we expect an employee to fall? Where would we say is the most equitable placement for that employee? And so what that allows us to do is it does address compression. If you see, as we talked about before, range compression, where somebody's been at the county or in their current position for 15 to 20 years, we wouldn't expect them to be right at the minimum of the range. This will correct that. In any of the cases where we find an employee below the recommended projected salary, we would move them up to that projected salary. It does not decrease employees who are currently making more than their projection. So nobody has to leave this thinking, well, wait a second, my projection was lower, and so I got to decrease. That does not happen. Nobody would lose anything from this. So what that means is if you do have an employee who you hired from the outside, and they maybe had some extensive experience or credentials that they brought into the county, and you were able to hire them above the minimum, we're not going to move them back to the minimum just because, again, they're newer in the role. We're going to let them keep that salary if it's above the projection. So again, we're not going to erase any gains from anybody, but if you find yourself below your projection, you move up. That's a strong selling point, because it means we can tell every single employee you are making at least your projected salary according to this model. The recommended implementation, does help to ensure that you are going to ease the compression concerns that you have. Any recommendation that you're going to give, that's going to affect hundreds and hundreds of employees, there obviously could be an individual case where we would say, hey, this may need to be looked at. Your HR will be able to do that in the future as the need arises. We are going to provide them all the tools that we've used to make these recommendations, throughout the process. So if anything comes up in the future, if we find a compression concern, or if we find a position that changes over time, we will speak with your HR and give them a training on our recommended methodology that we're using here. The recommended cost you can see up there at the top is a little bit more than $5 million. Notice that the percent of payroll, it is about 8.5% of this particular group, of payroll. That aligns relatively well with what we found. Again, the 5% market gap, a little bit more than that, and you're spending a little bit of money to address the compression. So we didn't look at this as any sort of recommendation here that was outsized based on the data that we found. We felt that it aligned well, again, with that market differential as well as the compression that we had found here. And we are recommending implementing, in one phase if possible. We understand there's a lot that goes into that. I know HR is going to walk you through a little bit more of the cost, the concerns, et cetera. But we did want to talk about implementing this in one phase if possible. It does give you a number of advantages if you're able to implement in one swoop. One of the things it gives you is cost certainty. Obviously, we're able to take a database now of employees and give you a projected salary for every single one of them. If you have new hires, if you have promotions, if you have any sort of changes, especially within departments, it can get a little bit more complex if you're going over a multi-year period or an extended implementation window. For departments to really understand, exactly what money they have to spend, on these salaries. So that cost certainty definitely helps you, but it also helps with the salary certainty as well for employees. That's a big one. It actually ties in with bullet number 4 down there, retention as well. We have built, of course, some clients come forward, so no, we have to do multi-year. When you do that, one of the big concerns you hear from employees is, well, wait a second. You're telling me I'm 10% behind the market, but I'm only getting a 3% increase this year or 4% increase this year. Why is that? Why can't I have the full increase? There is a significant concern that can come out depending on how that implementation methodology is implemented. And so that salary certainty for employees, the ability to come forward and say, hey, we found a market gap and we're going to correct that. We're going to put everybody where they should be. That's another big strength of this plan. And then fairness as well. So again, if you find an employee, maybe you find that they're 15% below the market. If you're going to break it up into multi-years, they get a little bit of that this year, and then they promote. What's the most fair thing to do? Do you continue to give them the additional pay that they should have gotten from the previous methodology? If they move into a newly promoted range, your HR is going to be looking at, hey, where is the best place to place those employees? That can be very complicated to give them a fair starting salary if we already know they're starting from a gap even before that promotion. So again, it allows you to essentially look at things all at one time, make sure that you are making the best and the strongest recommendation that you can. And then going forward, you maintain that system and you do the best that you can to not fall below market, to not allow new compression to come in, and essentially to administer a brand new system that's starting out with as much equity as you can have on day one. The hope would be, and they'll talk more about this, the hope would be to implement towards the end of this year if possible. And again, they'll cover that a little bit further. But I did want to talk about some of the strengths, again, of doing an implementation like that, of going with a hybrid parity model that does correct compression. It does look at the market, and it looks at the internal equity as well. So that was the information I wanted to share today. I definitely did want to leave a little bit of time for questions. I think if I'm looking at my clock right, we may have about 30 minutes or so for questions if needed. I'm happy to address anything specifically or a more general question about the process.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Questions? Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Welcome to Sedgwick County.
Thank you.
So a few questions just for clarity. When did the phase 1 outreach, when did this study happen? When did those surveys take place?
So I believe we started the surveying last year, maybe December, if that's the right time frame. I think it was, and we even did a little bit over the break, which is why we started with some of those virtually. So we started in December. I think a couple of the meetings did go into this year, including with directors. So maybe December to January would be the estimated time frame.
Okay, appreciate that. And then this is impacting 1,166 employees in the general pay plan. I see it's 8.5% of payroll. Percent of total employees, 40%. Is that a fair?
Yeah, it's under half.
Under half. So estimated 40% of total employees for Sedgwick County would be impacted by this. Okay.
And to be clear, just to clarify, that 8% is only the percent of payroll for this group. It's not 8% of total county payroll.
Okay, that's helpful.
We just compared it to this group's payroll.
Okay, but a couple questions right there that'll help with some clarity. And
Absolutely.
might ask you more a little later.
Sure.
Commissioner Lopez, have any questions?
Yeah, thank you. Just real fast, and I'm not asking you to change anything, I'm just curious how you came up with it. Last year, when we were having these conversations about pay and what a livable wage was, we said $15 an hour was the right amount at that point. Since then, we've seen a lot of inflation and other issues impacting the economy. So how is it that you got to $15 as a livable wage today as well?
So I don't know exactly how it would have been calculated last year. What we do typically when we look at the livable wage, we look at the Massachusetts Institute, MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They post a livable wage essentially calculator for every different location within the United States. So we'll type that in to see what is the livable wage in this area. When we looked here, I think it might have been like $15.02 or something would have been that minimum that we calculated here. It does calculate that living wage for one adult working with no children, no spouse. Again, we can't look at every single individual person. Obviously, if you have a child, the living wage goes a little bit up for you individually. If you have a more expensive apartment or house, it goes up for you individually. But that's the number that we pulled. It is from the MIT living wage calculator. And I don't know if there's any context of how it was pulled last time, but that's the number that we used.
Okay, and then also on the survey that Commissioner Beatty had mentioned, did that go out to everybody who's going to be impacted in this, the 1,100? staff
The
members?
job assessment tool did, yes. We gave everybody the opportunity to participate. We didn't have 100% response rate, but we did have a strong response, I believe, of about maybe 3/4 of the employees provided data and provided information, which gave us excellent coverage, again, across all impacted groups.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the briefing. You looked at a segment of our employees that we haven't looked at before. We've been going through a lot of this process, looking at all kinds of different pay ranges. I guess my question goes to how does this now, where we haven't looked at this group compared to the groups that we have looked at in the past, if we're looking at internal equity, are we equity? Is there equity across our entire organization now, or do we still have pockets that we got to worry about?
So I can address sort of briefly. I'll turn to HR if they want to add any context as well, since we didn't look at the other, organization, or excuse me, the other groups that weren't impacted here. What we would say from an internal equity perspective is, again, one of the key things to look at is how does each group compare to the market? We know it's not going to be that every single group should be paid the exact same. Right now, if we found that your group that we looked at here is about 5% below the market on average, we know that there is an equity issue. We need to raise those up, to that more equitable rate. It does make me think again that some of this group here would have been in a lower slot than they should have been versus the other groups who may have seen increases and raises over the past couple of years. Obviously, I can't speak to exactly what happened there as we didn't study those groups. But we do think this absolutely would allow you to have an equitably sustained pay plan, because this group right here is going to have the equity that they need with the market. And with the other groups internally, that's something that HR would be able to look at as well. So if you're going to add any context for the other groups.
I do. So last year, you might recall, we created 7 additional pay plans. And so this year, we're looking at the general pay plan to implement those. One of the things that we are not ready to do is begin to overlay those plans, because the plans that we addressed last year brought them to a marketable level and addressed that. But we're not ready to integrate those plans with the general plan yet. But you will see, and I know you already know this, but we'll be looking at making those intermittent adjustments, to the pay plans, because we want to keep them moving with the market as well. So that will take time as those plans all catch up to each other.
Okay, well, I guess my question was all called around, say you're in this department and we gave you a new pay plan last year, and now we come up with this new pay plan here. And we're going to have people saying, well, I want to work over here. And now we're just moving people from one department to another as a result of that.
I don't think so. But we do have instances where people do move from different pay plans. But what we do is we look at those on an individual basis where they would be placed within that plan.
Well, it comes down to things like the sheriff trains a lot of people, and then suddenly the police department gives a big pay raise. So then we've trained them and we've got them ready, and then they go across the street. So I don't want that to happen internally.
I think the jobs are so incredibly different from the general pay plan versus the other pay plans that we have in place, that unless they had a true interest to move to that profession, I don't think that's going to happen.
I'll also mention that within the general pay plan are sheriff's employees or EMS employees, or last year, what we attacked was the workers, the frontline workers who were out in the field. So the employees who were front facing, dealing with public. So you'll see in the general pay plan, we kept equity amongst, for example, clerical positions, administrative positions within departments. There's equity within those groups through this general pay plan, if that makes sense.
Can you remind us all, and what were the 7 other plans what departments were those?
So the 3 plans that we had in place were the general plan, the sheriff's plan, and the DA plan. We added EMS and fire on a step plan. ComCare got 2 pay plans, corrections got 2 pay plans, and emergency communications is on a plan.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. So this, did you, when you guys did your comparisons, did you monetize benefits to do a comparison for total salary, including benefits, or is this just salary, wage income only?
So we look at benefits as well to ensure that the total benefits offering, the sort of the total value of that package is approximately the same, which we did find, good alignment between yourself and the market peers. What we did not do is we did not say, well, this organization spends 26% on benefits and this one spends 29%. So we need to make a 3% adjustment there. We did do a check to see essentially, are we in the same ballpark? But when you compare benefits that way, it actually requires a significant additional effort, additional time, additional comparison points, because you can't just say, well, they're paying X number of dollars for their healthcare and they're paying the same amount, so it's equivalent. You can have, obviously different deductibles, you can have different coverage levels, you can have a richer plan in other ways. So in essence, yes, at a high level, we did look to see that you are comparable with the market. You're spending about the same amount on benefits as your other public sector peers are. But that did not find itself into the comparison where we would have said, if you're 2% higher, we can make pay 2% lower to account for that, if that makes sense.
It does. I guess, of course, I'm not doing the statistics like you are, but I think every benefit has a cost. I mean, for example, health insurance, you have a more Cadillac plan, costs more money, has lower deductibles, but there's a cost to that. There's a cost for time off. There's a cost for how many holidays. There's a cost for short-term, long-term disability if it was provided by the employer. There's a cost for really everything you can think of. So when I worked at a previous employer, for example, they went out of their way to make sure the employees were aware of the total cost of the benefits, because when people start looking for other jobs, they were very proud of the fact that they were very generous with their benefits. And you even said already up front that our employees are generally pretty happy with the benefits. I think, especially compared to the private sector, our benefits are perhaps better than what you would find in the private sector generally.
Generally.
And again, I think different generations maybe respond to that differently than other generations. I'll just be very general with my comment there.
Sure.
But, some people may not be as interested in retirement benefits as others would be. They might be more interested in wage income, for example. But anyway, if it were possible to monetize the value of benefits, then you would have a direct comparison, say they put more money into wage income and less money into benefits. This other company or other organization puts more money into benefits, less money into wage income. To me, that's the real comparison. And we've done these market studies in the past. I don't think we've ever actually done a benefits comparison that was added back into the cost of salary to the organization. We've always kind of just say, well, we're comparable. Actually, I would say we're better. Last we did a salary study. We were over, I forget where we're now, WSU, I think. I made the same comment back then. We compared very, very well on benefits, but that wasn't considered. When we do a salary wage comparison, it was disregarded. And I just think it's not fair to not consider that in the total picture here. Maybe our employees would rather have slightly less benefits and more wage income. I think that's a choice we ought to be talking about. If that's what they want, I think that's something we should understand better. Another thing is, it sounds to me like, generally speaking, Sedgwick County, on most employees, I think there's a few exceptions to this, but for most employees, they start at the bottom of their wage, of their pay scale. Okay. They're considered entry level, even though they may have experience. We're not recognizing the experience in place and inserting them into the scale. Generally speaking, they start at the bottom. You want to?
So there are circumstances where we would look at bringing an employee higher than minimum. They do an exception request. We have a process that goes through that would place them higher than minimum. But we also remember too that people can have work experience, but that work experience might not directly correlate to the job at hand. So we have to make sure that we're bringing people in appropriately for the work that's applicable to the job.
The reason I'm bringing this up is, we're looking at two main factors here. Time within the organization and time on that specific job. Those are two factors that are being considered. I think that, again, the private sector is really good at inserting people into a pay scale.
Mhm.
They might say you're brand new, but you're making more than I am. But coming with the experience in someplace else. And one of the examples, let me just use an example. Maybe someone is a retired firefighter from another state and they moved here. Maybe their spouse is in the military. They come in and they're a very experienced firefighter. I would feel really badly about putting them at the bottom of the pay scale. But I think that's generally what we do. We put them at the bottom. And I see sheriffs in the room. Generally speaking, I think the law enforcement sector, for the most part, puts them at the bottom. I know some organizations, like some of our cities, for example, they don't do that. Someone comes in, we're not going to be able to compete with other cities because they will insert them into their pay scale, whereas we probably won't. So
I would say a lot of departments have built matrix that look for lateral transfers, and they're starting to do that a lot more.
So again, if someone has time in the organization,
Mhm.
I hate to see them not be recognized in their pay
Mhm.
when they actually have relevant experience.
Sure. So there's a couple things I'll mention with that. That's a question we do get a lot when we do these studies. We get the question, well, are we recognizing outside experience or can we do that, et cetera? There's a couple pretty big, basically stumbling blocks that stand in our way typically from doing that. Is number one, unless the information is tracked equitably across the organization, and unless that's in a sort of a central place, if HR, for example, was able to tell me, hey, Mark, we have a really good number for every single person who works here on their previous experience. That's the first big one. We almost always find that that's not the case. And so if you do say, well, hey, let's go out and let's try to collect this from people, it can be extremely difficult to verify the information. Again, I think we said 1,100, whatever employees impacted by this. If we were to say right now, okay, we don't have the verified information that we can rely on to adjust salaries for every single person, we have to collect that from people. That's 1,000 people we have to call references. That's 1,000 people we have to check and see, okay, so they listed this experience here. Is it actually the same experience, or is it at a lower level? We're going to allow them to get some additional credit than where we would have actually brought them in. And so that can be a pretty big stumbling block. The other one is the cost. I mean, it can be incredibly expensive to actually compensate for all of that. Again, in one swoop right now when we come in, if we were going to say, hey, let's look at all of this previous experience, a lot of times you can price yourself right out of something you can afford at any rate. So again, neither of those are things that we would say, hey, we can't even look at it. If it's a desire for us to take a look at that, we're certainly happy to explore the feasibility of that. But I think I've probably gotten a few dozen requests of that, of that nature in the past couple of years. I think we've done it maybe twice where we found the organization really said, yeah, let's actually do this. This is actually a fit that we can move forward with. So I'll just share that again in general. If the county would like us to take a look, we're more than happy to help with that. But those are two issues we typically see.
I just, that type of policy is going to always, I think, bring us younger, less experienced employees. And younger is totally great, but less experience may not be what we really want. We may want someone with great experiences, but they're not going to, if they're competing in the private, in their world, they're competing for jobs that are going to pay higher than we're going to pay. They're not going to be put at the bottom of someone else's pay scale. They're going to be inserted. So our policy inherently brings, it creates, if you will, a situation where we really can't compete if we're not willing to do that as well.
So to clarify then, to what I'm speaking to now is essentially looking backwards and fixing and correcting anything that you've done previously. If there were the desire to go from now on and insert a new hiring policy where we look at equity, we look at where people are going to be placed, doing exception requests, just like HR just mentioned. If there were the desire to expand that policy, that is something you could look at going forward. My statement here was reflecting, hey, going backwards and looking at every single person and crediting them for previous experience that they maybe didn't get when they were hired here 20 years ago. That's what that was referring to there.
This might be a question for Lindsay, but the summary here, that $5 million number, that's not the number we saw the other day. Can you please explain the difference? We saw,
This is what's computed based strictly on the salaries for this hybrid parity model. What we're going to talk about later in your 11:15 session is going into the details of those figures that you saw the other day.
and then I guess final question comment would be, this also doesn't take into consideration the performance of each employee. In other words, you might have some people very high performance. They just think 911, for example, maybe they're answering twice as many calls as somebody else. They're very good at what they do. Perhaps maybe somebody else isn't quite isn't performing quite to that level. This isn't taking consideration their skill set or their ability to produce more, whatever services are doing. This almost excludes that entirely.
This adjustment here does not factor in performance. Again, you sort of run into the same exact issue as, do we have data on performance that we could use for every single employee across departments, that we could apply fairly and equitably across the board. And so again, you're right, that is not included here. That does not preclude the county in any way from using performance going forward. But you are correct to identify that the hybrid parity model does not factor in performance for that adjustment.
That's all my questions. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
And Mark, Gene, at the first of your comment, so your company has done like 900 of these comparables.
I think we went over 1,000 recently. Yeah. So we absolutely, we have.
And a number of them within Kansas.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's, to me, from a global position, it's comforting to know that your data is been churned enough and presented, and I have a sense of confidence, at least in the data. And
Absolutely, I
thank you
appreciate that.
because we've had experiences where we guess what might be best.
Right.
Either not we all, but maybe individuals think in a department this is the best, and so this is very helpful. I know we'll have further discussions about a lot of details coming up, but that's just my global summary comment. Is there any other comments from commissioners at this point?
I do want to add, Bethany was able to pull up some information. So far this year, we've had 14 individuals that we have hired in above minimum, so that have gone through that exception process and have been approved.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Any other
Thanks
comments
again,
or
Mark.
questions for Mark while
Is Mark
he's still here?
around? Are you around for a little while, or?
I can stay as long as you need me.
Yes.
See you next week.
I can stay as long as you need me today. Okay, thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we're going to plan for a quick, maybe 10-15 minute break, and then we'll come back in and talk more compensation from the Sedgwick County side. So we'll take a break.
Okay, thank you. See everybody back at about 10:45-ish. About 1 minute, 1 minute. Do we have a time?
I considered that. No, nothing. Well,
How's that? We don't have a wine glass to clean, so maybe I'll just do this.
I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay. All right, everybody, if we can have your attention, we'll resume. Thank you. And back on the podium is Sheena.
Yes, so
Okay.
I am the only thing standing, well, Lindsay's going to join me up here in a little bit, but we're the only thing standing between you and lunch. So we're going to be real exciting here. I have this slide up and I want to say that I actually took this from the Arnold Group from a compensation workshop that we attended just a few weeks ago. And I thought it was really interesting, the statistics, and I wanted to share those with everyone today. But I also think it shares a really good message of do it now or regret it later. And I think that's really been a theme with our compensation is that for years, even decades, we've made decisions to get us in the position that we've been in. And so for the past 2 to 3 years, we've been trying to come out of that hole with compensation and address these issues for employees. But with employee retention, so getting back to that, what makes employees stay is improved compensation. And what I'm really inferring from this is that it's moving up. It doesn't say corrected compensation or marketable compensation. It's that we're improving. And I think that's really our message that we've had to employees these last few years as well, is that we're committed to our compensation and addressing that. That's followed by 44.2% of a more flexible schedule, which was exactly in line with what Mark had presented, is that employees like the schedule. They like the ability of having a flexible schedule, even more so after COVID. Managers showing more appreciation. I know that we are working with leadership team to do some more acknowledgements and awards for employees. So we know that's on the go. More positive relationships with coworkers. And you might recall when we did our stay survey with employees, one of the questions we asked them was, do you have a friend at work? And I think we all kind of chuckled about that question going, why is that relevant? But it shows that employees want that relationship with others in the workplace, to have that positive relationship with someone. I enjoy coming to work because I enjoy the folks I work with. More predictable hours. I think that is in line with overtime. I've heard time and time again from employees, it's the overtime hours that are really stressful because I don't know when I'm going to be called in or how long I have to stay over. So again, if we improve our compensation, we can expand our employee base to have more predictable hours for employees. Fair treatment by management. We had a lot of employees talk about their supervisors and how they appreciated their supervisors. We're also engaging with more training with our supervisors. And those positive relationship with managers, which go hand in hand. More manageable workloads. Again, I think that shows that employees are willing to do the work, but when they don't have staff that are there to assist them, that workload becomes overwhelming, too stressful. And more career advancement opportunities and more training and skills development. And that is one area that we are taking on here in human resources to get our online LMS system up and going so that employees have an opportunity to get more training here at Sedgwick County. So I thought that was just really important to show what other organizations are providing, why are employees staying? And it really matches up with everything that we've been talking about. So again, going back to what our pay plans are, these are the top 3, the general, sheriff, and DA pay plans were the ones that were in existence before last year. We created a fire and EMS step plan. Those are 2 separate plans. Emergency communications and ComCare and Corrections both have 2 separate plans. We have provided you copies of those plans if you want to take a look at those, but those are all being managed within the organization. And one thing I want to mention on the DA's pay plan, we're not going to talk much about that office today, but we are in communication with them in regards to what their structure will look like. They've been a very good partner in communicating with us. So that is in the works, but it is not finished yet. Just again, to kind of recap what this Evergreen study truly focused on was our classification analysis. We really did a deep dive into those job descriptions to the point where I think Anna and Bethany and the departments know everything that should be in those job descriptions right now. Job descriptions change all the time, and we need to keep those updated so that way we make sure the employees are in the right classifications so they're being paid appropriately. Employees had a chance to give feedback through that job analysis tool. Again, that went out to everyone. We had a good response with it. We even had open meetings. So if someone was out on leave, they could contact Evergreen. We had a web page specifically set up for that they could reach out to Evergreen and give them feedback. So everyone had that opportunity. Those were reviewed by supervisors, and supervisors had a chance to say, yes, this is what that job does, or no, that's really not exactly what the job does. Let me add to that. So supervisors were an integral part of this. We focused on the type and the level of work. So again, employees have perceptions about their work. We were able to go in and gauge exactly what level of responsibility that work fit into. The compensation analysis, and Mark talked about the external and internal equity. Those are terms that you've heard us use several times, but internal equity is a real driver as well. Employees look out throughout the organization. How do I compare to other positions? And that goes back to the job description, making sure that we fully understand what those positions are doing. And finally, the administration of the system. We have to implement something and then we have to maintain it. So you will hear us not only talk about this plan, but what about those plans from last year? We have to maintain those plans too, moving forward. So again, with the general pay plan, we're recommending those recommendations from Evergreen. We are recommending the hybrid parity at 100% classification and 50% for your tenure years. This addresses that compression issue. I know we've talked about that on several different levels, and we know that there might be some pieces that change or we have to go in and look at more intensely than we had before, but it really takes care of those issues. And then it brings that starting wage to $15 an hour. And you might recall 2 years ago when we talked about that, that was a far aspiration that we had, was to get to $15. But this is moving it from 11 to 15. And when we were talking with Mark and his team about this, he really clearly explained there's not a market for positions between $11 and $15. We really need to move that up to be comparable for the workforce. We are also recommending that employees move to the new pay plan with those adjustments. As he mentioned, every employee is looked at. Every employee's calculation is made based on their salary, their time and classification, and their tenure. So it's not just a one and done. There's many, many names on the spreadsheet that we would look at. And then we're also recommending a pay adjustment in 2024. So again, the Evergreen is getting them on the scale where they should be. And then the pay adjustment in 2024 will be, again, continuously moving that forward. So I put some examples up here of how to kind of show how employees will be placed. And I have employee A and employee B. And what this does is it shows that their class years are about the same. So this means the time that they've been in their position is relatively the same, but their tenure years are different. So you can see employee A, time and position is 1.84 years. Their tenure year at the organization is 7.86. The hybrid years, this is the calculation that we get. It's 4.85, and we get that because we take 6.02 times 50% credit time, which is the difference between 7.86 and 1.84, plus your full service of years in the position. That employee's current salary is a little over $60,000. And that puts their new salary at 66,770. Again, employee B, who has the same amount of time in position, but was just hired into that position, has a current salary of 59. You can see that grade minimum up there is 61. So this employee is only getting credit for the time and classification. Okay, so that would move their salary to 63. So you can see that's how that's addressing the compression, is because employee A, who's been here 6 years longer, is going to have a higher salary than employee B. Yes.
Is this, Mark, is this consistent with other areas around the country? Who came up with this formula or how? Mark, you did, Mark?
Well, it is Evergreen's format. I can't take credit for it myself. It is something we've
Okay.
used many times over. Yeah, the hybrid parity is definitely one of the most popular methodologies we use. There's not one methodology we recommend everywhere. It is always based on what we see in the organization. But I will say when we bring up the hybrid parity, that is a popular one for organizations with similar concerns to what you all have here.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions about how a example employee would be placed based on the same time and position?
I don't think so. Is there a question?
I'm going to show another example. Again, this is just illustrative of how someone is placed and the formulas that we're using. So these employees have roughly the same time at the organization, but different time in class year. So employee A has been in their position almost 8 years, 7.9 years. So employee B has been in their position for 3.95. So again, using the same calculations, you can see that employee A, who has been in position less time, would have a different salary than employee B. And again, it's taking into account those tenure years and time in position. So that employee who has more time in position is making 45,000 versus employee B who has less time in position at 43,000. And I only illustrate this. I'm not wanting you to validate the formula, but to show that those are taken into account and employees can go in and actually look. And we have this placed at a certain time that we calculate that off of, which is January 1.
Questions? All right.
So the EMS, fire, and sheriff step plans, what we will be proposing to you in 2024 is that all those employees on these plans will receive their annual step. That was something that we committed to last year when we created specifically the fire and the EMS plan. Sheriff has been on a step plan for some time, but we would continue on with his steps as well. In addition, an employee will receive a 2% pay adjustment because we want to move that scale. So we want to maintain that scale. And I've put up an example of here of what that would mean for a firefighter. So today in 2023, that starting wage is $18 an hour. If we do a 2% adjustment, that now brings our starting wage to $18.36. That employee would also receive their step. So they're moving to step 2. And that puts their final wage at $18.91. So we are no longer using the scale in white. We'd be moving to the yellow scale because we're adjusting that scale over.
That's for EMS, fire, and sheriff.
That is correct. Okay, emergency communications, corrections, and ComCare. Employees will receive a 2% general pay adjustment. And we're having continuous review of market and employee placement on those plans. You might recall when we moved those plans last year, they were right at market. So we know that we are keeping up and in some cases above market on these plans. But we don't want to say we're one and done. We want to keep reviewing that. And we know that there's a lot of time between now and January 1. So we are keeping those doors open for more discussion and moving things forward. Yes.
Sorry, I need to back up once.
Yep.
I want to make sure that the sheriff is happy with what the step plan and what the plan is for the future.
Yeah, one of the things that I think was important for the exercise that we went through last year, that it can't be stagnant. And this is still moving forward, so yes.
Okay, and so this will, I don't want to do anything that's going to harm your recruitment or retention. And you think this will help them keep moving forward?
I think, yes.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
You're good. And I might add that we've also reached out to Chief Landerman and Chief Williams and spoke about these as well. So anyone who, a department head that has a pay plan, we've communicated with them what our recommendations are. Okay, and now I'm going to invite Lindsay up here to talk about what the financial impact of this will be. You don't have to look at the small sheet. We do have one a little bit bigger. Actually, you could stay there. But
Thank
with
you.
all of these recommendations that we have talked about, so again, I'll just, as a reminder, it's the adjustment to the general pay plan, the 2% to the general pay plan, the movement to EMS, fire, and sheriff, and then corrections, comm care, and emergency communications.
Yeah, just for clarity, what does sheriff start now? 2350, is that
2350.
before any 2% adjustment? Today
That's
is
correct.
20
Today is 2350, and that's for both road and detention.
Okay, and EMS?
Oh, 1534. Hold on. I'm sorry, it should be in your handout. We have the pay scales.
Is it?
1581. Stand corrected. Sorry.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Lindsay, I'll turn over to you real quick.
All right, thank you, ma'am. So referring to this sheet, I would encourage you to look at the bigger print one. So all of the assumptions that Sheena just walked through are listed at the top of this document. So this was actually prepared by Lorian. She did all of the hard work. I'm just talking about it. So my thanks to her and the team for putting this together. So what this is intended to show is the full cost of all of these assumptions that are listed at the top. And this also then compares it to what has already been built into the financial forecast that you last saw at your retreat. Now, later this month, you'll actually receive the bound quarterly report. Updated estimates will be included in that for this fiscal year. And so when Sheena talks about and Mark talk about implementation later this year, that will be taken into account in the forecast that you see. Now, this calculation here that you see is all of 2024. This doesn't look at just that implementation at the end of this year. So what you can see in the first column is the fund number. And again, Lorian has gone through and has highlighted if it's a county property tax supported fund, that means that a portion of our roughly 29.4 mils goes to those three funds for personnel. The next grouping of other funds is a mixture of grant funds. You can see the fire district fund, 911 tax fund. So some of our more unique funds that have a different funding source. And then the bottom chunk is internal service funds. And the reason that we highlight those, as Lorian has, there's an asterisk at the bottom. Some of those funds, most of those funds have a good portion of dollars coming from other departments. And so because so much of our budget comes from property tax funds, some of those budgets are also supported through property tax funds. So there will be some support that goes there. So working our way across, you see the hybrid parity with tenure at 50%. So that's what Sheena was just illustrating with the two examples, your time in class and your time at the organization. So you can see the estimated cost to implement that plan in the general fund is roughly 4.7 million. Then as we shift across, step plans, as Sheena mentioned, we have just some basic steps that we intend to have funded. That's what this cost is. If you move to the middle column, the 2% adjustment, that is what Sheena has just spent the last couple of slides outlining, as well as the folks who are on the general pay plan. When they would receive the 2% adjustment, that's this portion. So we take all of those things together, and what you can see is there, and I'm going to focus on the general fund again. You can see there's an estimated total cost to the general fund of 9.5 million. Now, your financial forecast already had 5.5 million estimated in it for pay. And so the increase due to all of this action that's occurring is going to increase the deficit by about 4 million in your general fund. And so you can see that's how that methodology works for every fund down throughout. And you can see the grand totals at the bottom. But again, for us, when we talk about financial forecasts and the mill levy rate and things that are really within your purview, it's going to be those top three. And then, of course, the fire district general fund. So that's the impact. What you will see in that quarterly report is a plan to implement this for November and December of this year. That would be the proposal. Again, that's because that gets all of your general pay plan employees slotted correctly. And then everyone has, thank you. And then everyone has the 2% pay adjustment in January. So we're starting brand new, fresh. Everybody's got the same thing. The estimated impact for that in the general fund for this year for November and December is $823,000. And so obviously you'll see and you'll hear in Brent's quarterly presentation as well, when he actually presents that report to you, we're seeing stronger growth in sales tax. We're seeing some other things that make us feel like that is a positive sign we're moving in the right direction. And so at this point, knowing that folks last year were able to get there in one swoop, budget and I are comfortable supporting this plan in one fell swoop. What questions do you have for me before I turn it back to Sheena?
So thank you for,
Or Lauren?
that was one of my questions, was how comfortable are you in finance? This is a one-time leap of faith.
It is. It's a
strong.
big leap after we did an 8% adjustment this year, after there were all of the pay adjustments that were made last year. There's tremendous progress being made. If you remember when we looked at your budget retreat in February, what you saw was that employees since the Great Recession have had an average take-home increase of 20%. CPI has gone up 34% in that same amount of time. And so our employees have borne really a lot of the decisions through our budget process with flat budgets. They have borne a lot of that cost. And so this is trying to get them closer to where they ought to be, because I mean, it's not just, the right thing to do for our employees, but we provide service. In order to provide service, we need people. Right now, we need to be competitive in recruiting and retaining qualified staff. So you're going to hear a lot of decision packages. We're going to have ongoing decisions about assessed value and what we can capture through the budget process. All of those things are there. But what we have heard from the commission the last couple of years is compensation is a priority. And so that's why we're supportive, because compensation is a priority.
I have a quick question and then a comment. In the other funds, a lot of stuff is grants. Are these for all these departments? A lot of y'all are here. These are, it appears they've always been routine annual grants. Or are these in jeopardy? In a big picture comment?
We have not heard that when we've had these conversations in budget team. There are some concerns here and there. I don't think it's anything that's unmanageable. And I just kind of got a head shake from Tim about any big concerns. So. Okay,
well, that's comforting. And then I guess my last comment would be that it goes to the last slide of Mark's presentation. Between what Sheena said with the formulas and what you're saying here, I do like, I'm not sure I agree with everything yet, but I do like that the cost certainty, salary certainty, fairness, employee retention, all those things would be so much easier for us to provide to the employees to say, hey, this is what it is. And that's just a comment I had. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
quick question. Thanks,
Yeah.
Chairman. I want to make sure I have my mind wrapped fully around that 4% forecasted pay pool. Can you give me the high level? What exactly are you getting at right there?
So when we do a financial forecast for you each year, the budget office starts with prior year actuals and builds a forecast out. So the forecast is what we really think is going to happen. It's not about the budget. It's not about the budget is a plan. It gets adopted in August, and then we start fresh that year with just a plan. So we start brand new in January with the financial forecast that says, here's what we really think is happening with our revenues. Here's what we really think is happening with our expenses. And then for outer years of that 5-year financial forecast, we add in a pool of what we expect compensation to grow by, health insurance to grow by, utilities to grow by, all of those things. And so what has been built into the forecast is a 4% pool, 4% pay pool. And that's just a variable. That's an assumption. I think everyone kind of expected that not to be enough because we knew that the pay study was still waiting to be completed, but we didn't have anything scientific to use at that time.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, thanks.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I guess my question goes to, we've already heard from the sheriff. Have you talked to the DA? What is his plan going forward? We covered there.
So we are communicating with the DA. We're actually we finished up some reports late last week, but we are in communication with the DA and what his pay pool would be allotted and how that would be slotted out for his employees. So we are in communication with him. It's just not finished yet.
Okay. Well, this pay plan now takes care of our other electeds and our appointed, and they're all in the room right now. And we've been coordinating with each one of them on their employees, all the row offices and their appraisers.
Yes.
And they're all in concurrence with what we're moving forward with.
I'm seeing their heads nod. So
Good.
Those were not strong nods, but they were nods nonetheless.
I would add, in Mark's presentation, he talked about where the initial slotting of employees was. We took that information and we reviewed it, and then we reviewed it with the department. So I will say Bethany and Anna have had the bulk of the meetings, but they've had one-on-one communication with the department saying, this is how it's set up. Do you agree with it? Is there anything that stands out right, wrong, or indifferent? And we've had more communication through that piece. So this is not fully our decision. It's an engagement with the department to make sure that we fully understand how their departments are operating and we're getting those in positions really placed where they need to be. So it's an interactive process.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. We're going to be the ones that have to make the final decision, but we also have to be aware of what their needs and desires are in each one of their department. So
Yeah.
before we make that final decision, we want to make sure that we coordinate with them.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sarah, Commissioner Lopez, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. No, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Howell?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. So top section, the top 3 lines. The total adds up to 10.1 million. And the difference, the shortfall or the deficit would be 4.47 million, which is actually less than the bottom of the sheet. I noticed that the middle of the sheet includes stimulus funds of 1.2. Is that?
That's positions in ARPA.
So
what you're seeing there is the 4% pay pool. That was in I mean, that's just an assumption that's put into everything. That's worth 1.4 million. You can see the actual impact in that total column is 148,000. So there's actually net improvement versus what was in the forecast there. And so that mitigates the overall reduction.
I guess the number that I need to realize, I mean, if the increase is funded through grant or through fee, that's well and good. My concern is the property tax funds.
Right.
And so really the impact on this, the deficit is 4.4 million.
It is. I think though, the general fund has some different rules and some different obligations. If you remember, we have target fund balances and aging and highways that we're trying to strategically draw them down to. So that to me is less of a concern from a deficit perspective than the general fund, which is where the vast majority of our operations occur and where the vast majority of our mill levy goes. Now that we only have 5 property tax supported funds overall. The 2 not listed here being bond and interest in WSU that obviously have no employees.
So at this point, surely you've, with the assessed value that's produced by Mark so far, do we have a budget that actually can support that?
So I will tell you, we
Total
don't
10
have a
million.
budget yet because we are still working through the budget development process. And so this is compensation workshop number 1. And then you will have your hearings with departments in May. We will have some other workshops that are going to pop up. I'm sure out of that, we'll still have conversations about capital improvement plans. And through all of that discussion, we also will need feedback from you all on what level of assessed valuation you're comfortable with us moving forward with in the recommended budget. Right now, the forecast includes 5%. My understanding that it is likely the actual assessed valuation estimate will be higher than that. But that is what we are planning for today. And again, the reason I'm saying I'm comfortable with this at this stage of the game in April, when normally you could not hold my feet to the fire and get me to commit to anything this early, is because we have said this is a priority. We know that we can't provide service without people. We know this is something that we have committed to our employees for years. It's a hybrid parity model, so it's not utopia as the word was used last week, but it gets us down the road. It gets us to the $15 minimum. And those are things that are going to make us market competitive. So that's why I'm comfortable saying we need to move forward with this and figure out everything else as we go.
Are these estimates based on full FTE placement? Is this assuming we have all the positions filled?
I believe it is. We have the vacant positions slotted in for the new minimum, right? So not necessarily that they would get the adjustment, but as the pay structure moves, those new minimums are taken into account.
Can we get a report on long-term FTE vacancies across our departments?
I'll tell you, there's not a ton in the property tax funds,
Okay.
but for
I'd like
some
to
of the
see that
departments where
also.
we hear about.
Could you define what
vacancies.
long-term? What? you're
Like
looking
more
for?
than a year.
More than a year? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Commissioner, I will tell you, if they have been vacant for longer than a year, then they're not picked up in the forecast. So we're not estimating anything to be spent on those positions. It may be budget savings, but it wouldn't have a forecast
Well,
impact.
yes, my response to that would be that to clean up our budget book, it'd be nice to trim the FTE count to correspond with that change as well.
Sure.
I don't want to see inflated FTE numbers that aren't funded in the budget. I think we need to get those numbers down where
Got
they more actual, if you will. Thank you.
I'm seeing positive nods to move forward. Not to approve the plan, but to move forward.
Well, we need to make sure we're heading in the right direction for the commission now.
Well, we are moving through this more quickly than I thought, or maybe we're having less discussion. But this is the piece that we had for compensation. And we just need, again, just clear direction on which way we're moving forward. And I know we'll have lots more communication and dialogue about this, but just overall, is this the direction you want us to go so we can keep moving this forward?
I do have one other question.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
And then let's let each commissioner respond back to you.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
So that way.
I apologize for the
Go
late
ahead.
question.
Go ahead, Jim.
How many employees are still getting the premium pay? Or do we still have that going on at all?
No,
I didn't think
No.
that was happening. Just want to make sure.
correct.
Okay,
And,
thank you.
and actually, if I could jump on that with the expiration of the national order, it is not even a remote possibility that we could do
Wanna
that
make-
any
I wanna
longer.
make sure
It's
that-
no longer eligible.
I thought that was the case. Thank you so much.
Okay. So your question again, repeat. Is this the positive
Is
way?
this
that-
the direction that you would like us to move this forward? Not saying that you're approving the plan today, but the general direction.
So let's each answer and maybe with whatever words of caution or optimism or whatever. So, Ryan, you want to go first? You want,
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I appreciate the work that's gone into it. I'm trying to get myself up to speed to where we've been and where we need to go. I think you're heading in the right direction. I think we need to prove out some things in the budget. We need to understand some things in the budget, but I certainly think that staffing stability is, I can speak for myself, is of prime importance. We can't perform good government service if we can't stabilize our staff. And so I appreciate the work that's gone into it. I think two things can be true at the same time. Just a broad statement about where my head's at. Two things can be true at the same time. Number one is that we have to get our pay scales correct so that we can stabilize our workforce. The second thing can also be true is this community would have a hard time enduring a property tax increase. And so when we build our budgets, those two things can be true at the same time. And that leads to very difficult decisions that we have to make. But those two things are true in this community. And more so with Sedgwick County government, as I look at how we've gotten to this point as someone that, looks at balance sheets and income statements for a living, as I look, it's rather frustrating, frankly, to see that we've gotten to this point, that all of this has to be pushed through as quickly as we can just to stabilize a workforce, just to perform good government service. So it's ultimately important in what we're doing. I appreciate the work that's gone into it. I understand the importance. And I think that we've got to find a way to get some of these things accomplished. So preliminary comments, kind of where my head's at right now, but I appreciate what we're doing.
Thank you. I agree that I think we're on the right track right now. I think that past actions that earlier commissions have taken have put us in this position, and that we're in the unenviable position of trying to correct some of the past action. Our organization, as you've been stated, is one that is a service organization. We work 24/7, 365. And without the employees, we're not going to accomplish the mission of Sedgwick County. The desire in the past of freezing mill levies, saying we're not going to raise property taxes, or we're going to hold the line, have got us in this position. And I think that we have to recognize that we've got to take care of our employees before that they can take care of the citizens. I agree that we need to make sure that we can hold the line on property tax as much as we can. But in the past, things like saying that we're never going to exceed a certain mill levy, I think got us to this position. I think in the past, some of the commissioners thought that the benefits would outweigh the pay. And granted, we've given some good benefits, but I think we're past that now. We have to make sure that we provide both benefits and pay if we're going to be able to recruit, retain the employees that we need to do the job. So I absolutely believe we're on the right track. But I hope that we can hold the property taxes down. But I believe that the citizens are going to say, hey, I get emails all the time that said, well, cut. Don't raise my property taxes, cut. And then I ask them, what do we cut? And they say, well, that's your job. You get paid the big bucks. You make the decision on what to cut. But the right answer is that you can't cut because we have to continue to provide those services, and it costs us more each year to provide those services. So I truly believe we're on the right track, and we've got to, again, watch what we charge for property tax. But again, we're not going to get there if we don't provide the services. Thanks.
Commissioner Lopez, are you on?
Thank you. Yes, I'm here. I agree with a lot of what's already been said. I think for so long, this county government has really grown and done everything it has almost on the backs of our staff by not even taking into consideration what where they should be today. And because of those years and years of budgets that have been passed that haven't put them first. I mean, we're where we are today. Over the last couple of years I've been here, we've been telling staff that, this problem wasn't created overnight, and it certainly won't be fixed in a year. If we can't now come in and say, okay, well, we've told you that we're not going to fix this in a year, then come back and say, now we're here again. So making sure that, this is a top priority still. If we can't do that, then we've been telling everybody something that just isn't factual this whole time. And I don't think that's right. So I think we're completely on the right path. I think we need to make sure that, $15 an hour is really important. I think that we get to, if we have our staff coming in and they're worried about, are they going to feed their kids? Or are they going to pay their bills? They're not going to be able to give us their best at work. And so we have to do what we can to make sure that we're easing that burden. And really, this is, I think, a really good plan on how we can continue to get there. So I agree that we have to be able to balance it. I mean, we're looking at that large deficit. We already know this. And so I'm a lot more comfortable with this plan after hearing Lindsay say that, because we make this a priority, that we'll figure it out, and that she's comfortable there. That makes me a lot more at ease, because obviously this is such an addition to that. But I again think that our staff has to be priority. We have to make sure that they know that they're valued, and the best way we can make sure our staff knows that they're valued is by paying them an appropriate amount. So I'm not saying that we're going to pass this exactly as it is, but I do think that we are right on the direction, and we need to do what we can to get something like that going.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Howell.
Thank you. Before I start talking, I have a couple quick questions. What was the, I think this is probably the fourth time I've gone through compensation presentation in my time here. The first one, let's go back about 2015. What was if you can recall, what was the under market percentage at that time?
It was significant, 6.6, I think.
I have 7.
Okay, maybe it rounded up, 6.6 to 7%. Back when we did the first Evergreen.
So we're better today than we were, right?
Yes,
Okay.
but keep in mind, we also did an 8% adjustment in January, which I think really helped a lot.
Sure.
Otherwise, this would have been much worse news.
Right. What's the average tenure for our employees these days? I'll let you work on that for a minute.
You have questions for me while they're working on that?
Yeah, I think one of the truths that we're not recognizing is there is a labor shortage today.
Mhm.
Unlike we've seen in previous years. This is a little unusual. For some reason, there's still, post-COVID, for whatever reason, there's less people in the workforce today than there used to be. Our workload didn't go down. In fact, I would say we're probably adding responsibility to our plate, which makes things even more difficult. But go ahead.
We'll have to get it for you. It's not a single report.
Okay. Well, anecdotally, I just feel like we have a fairly young workforce. And the reason that's important, again, I think that we spend a lot of time recruiting people and training people to leave. And retention needs to be a greater focus, I think, of what we do here. Part of the problem, I mentioned this earlier during the break, but we bring people in and we don't recognize their skill set necessarily. Maybe they've got experience, really very relevant experience in doing whatever it is they do, and we don't recognize that. Bring them in at the bottom. They come in dissatisfied, or we can't really compete. We can't bring them in at all. The fact is, one of the things we hear a lot about is we're losing employees to other organizations, which inherently tells you that other organizations are inserting them into their workforce. They have to be. No one would spend 10 years here and then leave and go someplace else and start at the bottom again. If they're not inserted, that's how they compete. They're inserted into their workforce. That has to be true. I just talked to Bethany, about roughly 3%, that 14 folks that were brought in above minimums, that's about 3% of what we've hired in the last, since the beginning of this year. 97% were started at the bottom of the pay scale, which tells you they're coming in brand new. We're training them from zero. They come in with whatever skills, whatever credentials they have to have, but we're training them here. Then they find opportunities and they leave. So I think this issue of inserting people in the workforce needs to have some additional considerations. I don't think we're ever going to compete if that's the way we continue to operate. And there's an issue of free market. Let me stress here that I'm very proud of our workforce here at Sedgwick County. I think they've done a tremendous job. I know when we compare ourselves with other organizations, I would say we're more efficient. Right? We do more with less, and that's actually to be commended. There's other organizations that perhaps they spend more money on labor and they have less performance, less to show for that salary. So we are more efficient, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing, but it's a good thing. When we have in the years past, when labor was more available, maybe wages weren't as competitive because we offered other things and people were more willing to work for Sedgwick County because of stability or because of benefits. But that has now changed because the labor force has also changed. And again, I would like to see us do more internal study on what do people value more, wage income or benefits? If they have to pick one or the other, which is their first choice? I don't think we understand that well enough. I would like to recognize the fact, again, it's great to have great benefits. It's great to have great wage, but if you had to pick one over the other, what's the higher priority? I don't think we really know that yet. I think we ought to find that out. I do think we're going in the right direction. So to your question, I think we're going in the right direction. I don't know. I know this is me just being worrisome here, but I do feel like we're entering a recession. What are we going to do if we get into a full-fledged recession? In years past, this type of thing may not be sustainable into a recession. So then you have to find ways to undo some of this. This is great as long as the economy continues to grow. So if the economy gets flat or even declines a little bit, we have a whole nother problem. Because this is a great pay plan, but it may not be sustainable if we get into a recession. So I do agree we're going in the right direction, but that's all my comments. Thank you.
Okay. My comment is, in general, I think this is the right direction. It's well presented and well thought out. My caution is that I got kind of twofold. I guess we can do this immediately to what I'm worried about in the future is if we do have a lid on property tax funds for revenue in the future.
We think we will.
Which is fairly likely, if not this year, it's in the going years. So, which will make you all and us all in a position of harder decisions. Those decisions might be kind of outside really the basic core of what Ryan does a nice job of talking about, the core functions of personnel. So if you had to prioritize some of these things and try to look crystal ball in the future, can't really say right now, but prioritizing our employees is probably very important. So that's I'm okay with the way we're going, but I'm very cautious of the future that we can't predict. And I guess when that happens, if it happens and that happens and we're in a bind, then I'm hopeful that us as an organization, including our employees, will understand the challenge or the potential limits or handcuffs, whatever you want to call it, that we may be under. So, but that's a communication issue that we can worry about next year or years after. Right. Pretty much. Okay.
I would just like to follow up on some of the comments that were made.
Okay.
We do also look at surveys that we put out to exiting employees. And one of the things that the main reason people put other, but those could be things such as retirements, maybe a spouse is moving or things like that. But that's followed by promotions or other upward job opportunities. So people may be leaving to take a higher paying job, but it's also at a higher level. Ranking in third is better compensation and benefits. So if someone, is doing the same level of job, with just higher pay, that's still coming in third on our exit survey information. So we keep an eye on that. We want to know where we rank within, compensation and benefits as well. So
What's 1 and 2? That's the-
other, which we usually see like retirements or spouses moving, maybe something in the family happens and
Totally
it
outside.
doesn't fit within one of our defined
Right.
criteria.
So the highest one is that one.
Yeah.
That's
Followed by a
Right.
promotion or higher job opportunity
Okay.
elsewhere.
Well, that's really good to know. Thank you for sharing that.
Tom, I might lean on you, which direction you would like us to go. We're ready to move into our additional compensation options such as PTO. Do you want us to take a break or do you want us to just keep moving forward?
How about a short break and then we finish up at that point, right?
That's fine. Yeah. We'll move at whatever pace you would like.
So.
Short break?
Commissioners, you want to take a short break and then we'll
He's over there. Knocking it out.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. The first topic we're going to talk about is paid time off, referred to as PTO, and this is simply a bank of leave time that is paid to employees in lieu of defined or sick and vacation. That is what we have right now. And as you heard and saw in the report also, this is very much in line with other entities that we have. When we previously spoke about this, we talked about a short-term disability option in part with PTO or an extended or individual leave bank as part of PTO. And again, this is for discussion and clear direction of how the commission would like to move forward. Some of the pros and cons of PTO, and I know that you have seen many of the pros and cons, but I'm just listing a few of these. Some of the pros are increased flexibility from the employee standpoint. There's less tracking in a system or management. So we're not necessarily tracking how much sick leave or how much vacation. It would just be combined of how much leave. And one of the questions I believe Commissioner Howell asked me the last time we discussed this was, is it possible to do two concurrent systems? And I do want to let you know that it is possible within our system to do that. However, there is a component to that we have to set up basically a new system within the system. And that takes a lot of time, preparation, and money to get that going. With the pros of PTO, we see more vacation usage and less sick leave. So those employees that are on a PTO program indicate that they're using that time more for their personal leisure as opposed to their sick leave. And studies also show that it does reduce burnout because, again, employees are using more of that for their time versus use of sick leave. Some of the cons are, again, the increased use of PTO as vacation and less sick time available. One of the concerns that I've had, and I voiced this several times, is we do have many employees who are on FML who have chronic conditions that use their sick time in that capacity, whether it's to receive treatment or to recover from something, but they're using that sick leave in that capacity, leaving them vacation to use at their leisure, but sometimes that sickness or ailment leads over where they have to use vacation in lieu of sick. Another con is that PTO would be payable to employees, whereas right now, if an employee leaves the organization, we do not pay sick leave to that employee. The only time that we pay sick leave out is if an employee retires, excuse me, and they have accumulated over 800 hours worth of sick leave, then they're paid out 240 of those hours. And last time we ran the numbers, I believe it was 29 employees received payout in 2022. There's also the management of two systems. So not only would we have to rework the system into running two concurrent programs, but also managers and supervisors would then have to be able to, thank you, Tanya. Managers and supervisors would then have to be able to administer those policies so that they were equitable with both employees. And then there's also some cost to having a short-term disability plan. This is an example of what PTO may look like. Again, with how many variables there are, we have not spent a great deal of time trying to put together a program because we don't know exactly what it would look like. But you can see here, we have our years of service, the current vacation hours, and the current sick leave hours that employees accrue today. With PTO, it's not vacation plus sick equals PTO. There is some give and take there. And so you can see that if we transitioned over to that, the majority of the time employees are not accruing the same amount that they would in a traditional sick or vacation setup. At the bottom here, you can see This was our information taken from 2022. An average employee, their sick leave was 83 hours. They averaged 111 hours of vacation leave for a total of 194 hours. Again, if you looked at this mock setup or mock example, you can see that employees would not even accrue enough PTO, and they're really just at that level for accruing sick and vacation right now for the total of 194. But a lot goes into that setup. What would it look like? Again, do you have short-term disability? Do you have a leave bank? How much time do you have accruing? What tiers do you want? Again, several different directions with that. This is what a short-term disability quote would look like. Kind of upwards of $800,000 for us to have a plan. We've got quotes with both a 0 and 7 day for an accident and sickness, or we could have a 7 day and a 7 day with accident and sickness as well. The concerns that I have with this setup is that the employee is then responsible for putting in these claims. This would not go through payroll. They would not have any of their capers or KP&F deducted from that time. This would be a payment from the vendor, which in our case would be MetLife. So there would be an added step for employees to go through that process to get reimbursement. It is a 60% amount of salary up to $1,000. There is a maximum of 26 weeks, but that does put a certain level of employees who gross over $1,000 per week, that they would actually be getting a deduction in their payment if they were to use a short-term disability plan. Is there any questions about the setup?
Sheena, are you going to cover what that does to KP&F and capers?
I just mentioned that that would not be deducted out of there.
Okay. That's fine.
And, you know, there are some concerns if someone went out on an extended leave like FML or something of that nature, specifically with KP&F, who is really, if someone's close to retirement, they're really looking at what those quarters of income would be. So there is a concern there. Other questions?
May I clarify?
Yeah.
So it says here, elimination period. Please explain what you mean by that.
So that would be essentially a waiting period. So on option 1 here, on this elimination period, for an accident, if I had an accident, I wouldn't have to wait any time. I could go ahead and put my claim forward. If I had a sickness, I would have to wait 7 days before I could put that claim in.
So that option 1 is only $30,000 more to the county.
Yeah.
No, that's obviously refer. Can you please explain the $1,000 situation again? Please explain. I'm sorry, I didn't catch all that.
Sure. So it's a maximum benefit, maximum gross benefit of $1,000. So 60% of your gross wages up to $1,000.
So that's per week.
Yes.
So they get to $4,000, let's say 4.3 weeks per month. They would get up to $4,300 per month on that average. If that was 60%, I could do the math. It would be what's the salary that would become? I can calculate it.
Yeah, I'd have to double check on that. But I mean, just knowing what grossly amounts that we pay in certain positions, it would be a cut and pay for some individuals.
It'd be a pretty high number though. It'd be like those well into 6 figures and above.
Potentially, yes. Yeah.
Well, I'll do the math in a minute, but yeah, I think so. Okay. And I'd like to comment about the PTO in general, but I don't have any questions about this chart now.
Okay. Okay.
Any questions, Commissioner Ryan? No. The Commissioner Lopez, do you have any comments?
I have a question. What does this, and I apologize if I missed it, but what does this cost if we ran PTO in addition to what we have now? Like, what would be the financial burden on the county?
We would have to go get a quote from our vendor to help us create essentially, Mike might know the word for this, but a new system that would statement of work. Thank you. that would encompass everything. So how do you accrue? When do things drop? And that would all have to be connected to every position. So I don't know what that statement of work would be, but you know, we'd have to define what those parameters are before we could ask what that scope would be.
Okay, and just one other question. You've been doing, I mean, it seems like a ton of surveying the staff and trying to figure out really what they're wanting and what they're needing and what would be best for them. Is PTO coming up a lot?
No, I don't hear that from employees. No.
We might ask Evergreen, you guys have had the latest touch to employees. Did it come up in any of your surveys or discussions since you were talking about compensation specifically?
I do not recall specific requests to change the time off system. Most of the comments we got about benefits were positive. There may have been one or two, but I don't recall hearing that directly.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Well, I know that this is one of Commissioner Howell's main objectives for benefits. However, I don't know if it's a priority to the other four commissioners. So before that we task the staff to spend a lot of time on PTO, I need to know if it's worth the time that the staff is going to expend on it if we only have one commissioner that's interested. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Howell?
No, I don't think that people understand it yet. So I hope that you give this some due diligence in the thoughts, whether this is good or not. The average sick leave being 83 hours. I don't know how that, I assume they took the sick leave of all the employees, added them up and divided by the number of employees.
Yeah, it's everyone.
There are some employees that have a large number of sick leave hours. All right, so that would skew that number. If I was to plot this differently and say, for employee number one, they've got 10 hours, employee number two, they have about 12 hours, and on it goes. And it was to plot that, I would think you'd find a large number of them, especially employees who don't plan on sticking around very long. A lot of them use their sick leave when they get it. Am I fair in saying that?
I think that's fair.
Okay, so if someone uses sick leave, they have to be sick, pretty much. That's kind of the county policy. They don't just say, I'm calling in sick today, and I'm going to go enjoy myself fishing at the lake. I'm going to be sick. I think in some departments, they consider that to be an ethical issue. So they can't just take a day off and use a sick leave. They actually have to be sick. But some of these employees don't necessarily, I guess the amount of sickness could be anything from, I guess my point is this, I think employees want to use sick leave because they don't want to lose it. And it's a benefit. So it's their advantage if they don't plan on retiring. It's to their advantage to not to walk away with a bunch of sick leave. Okay. If they retire, they get 240 hours. There's not a lot of incentive not to use it. So there's a lot of incentive to use sick leave. And I think a lot of our younger employees especially do use a lot of sick leave. It's also wreaks havoc in the workplace. If someone calls in sick and you thought they were going to be here today, the manager has to plan now to do all the work with missing employees that you thought were going to be there, but they're not there because they called in sick that day. So we have to overstaff a little bit. Also, I think employees have trouble enjoying themselves on those days off because they can't go on vacation and use that on a cruise. They can't use that to go fishing or go to enjoy themselves on a longer vacation. They have to take them one day at a time here. And so I think that if it was PTO, they can take up to 3, even 4 weeks off at one time if they wanted to. So, I mean, your example here, 0 to 5 years of service being 20 days off. That's 4 weeks off in a year. And they can plan it ahead of time. The manager can know their employees are going to be gone. They can staff differently to make sure they can cover that employee that's going to be gone.
Well, with PTO, you would use that as sick or vacation. So if you were sick, you would still use PTO.
Right.
And you wouldn't know when you were going to be sick. The same way we use it now. And I would think that would be bad departmental policy to allow an employee to be gone for 4 weeks straight outside of protection under FML.
I agree. And again, I think we ought to trust our employees to make those decisions, but maybe they would save back a week or so, 10 days, and they would use the rest. But today they're incentivized to use their sick leave. They really are. And I think there's the problem. I want our employees to enjoy their time off. to plan those days off and to enjoy themselves. And right now to use sick leave, they really can't do it that way. And it really, I think the management of those missing employees is also difficult for us to manage. So in departments that say, I know someone's going to be gone, we can plan ahead, they can schedule it, is a preferable way to handle time off. I can't speak for the sheriff, but I know, for example, say someone works mandatory overtime, and then suddenly they go into a new pay period and they're sick a few days because they're exhausted. And then somebody else has to work mandatory overtime because they're covering the guy that's missing. And then they switch places, so to speak. There are, I think we're paying for this more than one way. The mandatory overtime, because we don't know who's going to be missing necessarily. We have other costs we're not even calculating it into here. So I'll just say this: we can not do this again. The private sector's moved in this direction, no question. And a lot of these employees are getting more time off that they can enjoy, they can plan. It's better family time, it's better relaxation time, it's more usable. And I think for us not to offer this, we are not competitive on this issue. And again, you say to someone, did they ask for it? Well, do they even know about it? Maybe they're not asking for it because they don't even know about it. But the private sector is moving in this direction for a reason. So again, if you were asking employees, would you like to have 20 days of time off? You can take it off whenever you want. And by the way, if you quit, we pay you the difference. We pay you out all the days. You actually have to retire to get the money, and you don't have to be sick to get the money. It's money in your bank account. You can know that you're going to get paid that money. This is a benefit to those employees.
I would hate to market something to say an employee, if you leave, you get money from us. I think PTO, as it's stated, should be a benefit for employees to use, not to use to leave, because that cost us significant amount of money.
What I'm saying is employees right now bank their vacation. If they leave, they get paid out their vacation, unused vacation.
Yes.
This is just like that. So you're taking part of their sick leave that currently they would get, and probably, again, younger employees are consuming it as they get it. Okay. If they don't plan on staying around, they're incentivized to do so. So we split that with them. We recognize up front, we want to give you that into it as like it's vacation. It's all the same. You can use it, or you cannot use it and bank it up, and you get paid whenever you leave the organization. We pay you whatever the balance is in that account. That's how the private sector is handling this. And I think for employees to have that type of benefit and be able to plan their time off is a benefit for the workplace, it's a benefit for the employee.
But again, I don't think employees can always plan their sick leave. We have many employees who are on extended FML leave that are using sick time for, like I said, treatments and chronic illnesses. And it's not always predictable when they need to be gone.
Well, let me clarify let me rebut that. So as a new employee, I probably won't want to go to zero. I might want to bank up 30 days before I start using it. On my second and third year, I'm going to be taking 4 weeks off a year. And it's planned time off. I may not feel like I need hundreds of hours worth of sick leave because I have short-term disability to cover that shortfall. You might just say, in the worst case, when I get sick, and by the way, I am 50, I'll be 60 years old this year. I have never been sick more than a couple of days at a time my entire life. Knock on wood. My point is, if for me, I would rather say, let me save back 10 days of sick leave or 10 days of PTO, and I'll have short-term disability. If I ever need it, I have that to back up my situation. I have better time off. And if I leave the organization, I get paid more. I don't have to sit there and call in sick and pretend I'm sick to get my benefit. Okay. I don't want to accuse anybody of that, but we know what happens. Okay. People have to be sick to get their benefit. I just think it's bad policy. The private sector has moved in a different direction for a reason, and they're competitive. The employees in those situations, they love PTO. And so you ask someone, did this come up? The answer is probably not, because they didn't even know to ask about it. So do a study and find out, do employees want to have this type of benefit? I think you might be surprised. Thanks.
Chairman, I got a question for Mark. We've heard the statement that the businesses outside of this organization are moving towards paid time off. It's a benefit that they're clamoring for outside of Sedgwick County. Have you seen that?
So we didn't specifically survey private sector, and so I don't have any specific data to reference. I will say from what I've read, I think it's a fair statement that private sector is a little bit more that direction than public. And so if you are trying to be potentially cutting edge or matched to the private sector, I think you will see a little bit more PTO offered. I think part of, I don't want to speculate too much. Yes, I think you'll see a little bit more in the private sector than the public. We did actually collect benefits data and surveyed your peers. And about 85% of them are still doing a sick and vacation pay currently. That's the public sector peers. So I think it is safe to say that the public sector has not gone that direction fully yet. Again, I think Commissioner Howell's done a good job of describing the benefits of a PTO system. But I think it would put you a little bit outside what your public sector peers are doing, and it would move you potentially a little bit more to the direction of what the private sector is doing. If that's the direction you want to go, there's no reason you have to match exactly what the public sector does. But that's, I think, what the data would show right now.
Well, all the commissioners received the document from the manager that described this. And I think the cost of this is that it's fairly high for us to maintain two different systems. I'm very concerned if we spend a lot of time and effort on it, and I'll repeat myself, do we have more than one commissioner that's interested in this before we spend a lot of time and effort? Thank you.
And thanks for the presentation, and Commissioner Howell, thanks for your passionate, pitch about it. But I think what we've done the first half of today and what we've got going on in the future, I'm not interested in asking you to move forward on this at this time either.
My final comment, thank you. I've been asking about this for probably 6-7 years now. And I think the conversation is a touch complicated. I think we ought to know this deeply and make a very educated and thoughtful decision based on employee feedback. We've not done our due diligence on this issue. It's easy to do nothing. It's easy to not change. I think employees deserve to understand what's being discussed here, and they ought to weigh in. I'm going to stop talking about this. We'll let the record show. I think we can do better for our employees. Thank you.
I don't see any other comments from commissioners. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to bring Anna up, and she is going to talk about bilingual pay. Oops.
So something that we have consistently heard from departments and what they need to continue to provide improved services to the citizens within our county is an option to provide bilingual pay to attract employees that are bilingual, and for us to also then have positions that the qualifications require them to be bilingual. In order to do that, we need a bilingual pay system. So what we are proposing is an additional supplemental rate of 25 cents per hour. What you see on the slide shows what we're currently estimating the cost may be. But until we really start engaging with departments and even get information on specific employees, I will say that we believe this estimate is high. It's a representative sample. So based on the positions within our county, we would go through all of the positions and determine which ones would be bilingual eligible. For example, tag office clerks or clerks in the other row offices, health department employees in WIC that have a public facing position, EMS and fire employees that are out serving the public. Those types of positions would be eligible. Positions like myself or others in HR or finance, those who aren't interacting with the public, those positions would not be bilingual pay eligible. So we would not do the supplemental pay for them. So just a rough internal look at the positions within the county that are public facing. We estimate about 2,302 positions could be eligible. And within Sedgwick County, 14.1% of our population speaks a language other than English. This is from the American Community Survey, which is done every year based on the United States Census Bureau. And this 14% isn't just people who may speak it casually, they took a couple classes and know a few words. It's people who speak it within their home or regularly day to day. Because we would only be doing the supplemental rate for employees who would be proficient in another language. They would have to go through testing and attain a certain score to be able to get the supplemental rate. So based on that 14.1%, we estimate about 325 employees within that 2,302 positions could be bilingual. And then based on the number of hours they work, then it's an estimated additional cost of $164,000. Right now, we know that we would proceed with Spanish and Vietnamese. Any languages outside of that, we would work with the departments, and based on the populations they're serving, if there is a business reason for additional languages. So, but what we're seeking today is your approval to move forward and start doing the work of working with departments to figure out what positions are exactly should be bilingual eligible.
Okay, any comments? Let's go down the aisle. Brian?
So I like this option. I'll tell you some of my reservations as I'm flipping through the packet and looking further is we would consider this as a benefit, an added benefit, an incremental benefit, or would we, I mean,
it's not a benefit. It's appropriately paying employees for a skill set that we need them to have in order to appropriately provide services within our community.
Okay. Yeah, I see it and I like it substantially, particularly when you look at market demographics, and I believe where our community is heading over the next decade plus. I think I do think it's a needed service. I'm interested in that number, if that the accuracy of that number is. We begin to look at the entire pot of what we're trying to accomplish in compensation,
right,
and then prioritizing what levels and when we do it. Is this something that you think that needs to happen this year? Is there something that we can look at on a 2-year, 3-year basis to make sure that we can accurately pay for what we want to accomplish first?
I think what we are hearing from departments is there is an immediate need for it right now.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And again, you know, as Anna put this together, this is our best guess estimate on this right now, starting at 25 cents. We've seen things, I think we initially were looking at things and other organizations that had $1. And again, we're just trying to grasp what positions would actually be eligible to receive this compensation. So we know that there will be some adjusting within there.
Yeah, but if there's commission will for it, then we would start doing that work. And then when we're prepared and have more knowledge, then we would bring it to you for approval at a commission meeting.
It would be through policy adoption.
Sure. Well, if you're telling us that this is a need, that you have our current workforce is saying, hey, this is something that we need to shore up, then I'm happy on my end to say that I think it's something we should investigate further.
Okay.
Commissioner Lopez?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I mean, if we can look into this further and just see what the actuals will be and then plug that into our forecast, if it's a need, we know that communities are growing, minority communities are growing in our communities. So how can we make sure that they're able to access our services in the same way everybody can? So yeah, I would like to see what the actuals would be for that.
Dr. Dennis?
I'm just trying to figure out your math. Do we have to have 2,302 positions at $25, 25 cents an hour?
No, that was me going through the staffing table and marking which positions I think may have a forward facing component.
Like all of 911, it said these, all of the.
Every call taker and dispatcher, they're all there. Yeah. So we'll have to start working with the departments about which positions there really is a business need for them to be bilingual.
Okay.
That would be a maximum number, right? It could go.
Everybody was bilingual of those 23.
But I can't believe we'd ever need 2,300.
Well, that's positions. The number that we think could be bilingual then would be that 325. And that's what that number is based off of.
So the cost of 164,000, that was 325 times 25 cents an hour.
That is the total annual hours in the last column times 25 cents. You want me to walk you through it? So we have
I don't see how you end up with a 6 on anything when you multiply it by 25. It's either going to be a 0 or a 5 on the end, isn't it?
I didn't reduce the decimals in my rounding. I apologize.
So rounding.
Well, I could try to figure out if it's 164,000. I don't know how your math goes, so I guess we need to look at it. I don't have a problem with looking at it. I just need to know what it's gonna cost us.
Okay.
Right now, when you're looking at $4 or $5 million extra above our forecast for other things, it's concerning to keep adding.
Commissioner Howell?
I don't disagree. There's a need for people to speak two languages. That's a good thing. But curious, if they call 911 today, I think Laura's talked about, she has some people there that deal with those folks that can't communicate in English. She already has something in place. Is that correct?
So she might have people on her staff that are bilingual, or like many of departments, they use an interpreter service that does cause a lag in the amount of time that they can start conversing with the community member, because they have to connect with the interpreter service.
So do we anticipate that's going to change with this policy?
It could potentially.
I mean, do we think someone's going to go learn a second language to get this 25 cents?
Oh.
I don't think that's going to happen.
They
So I
probably
guess-
not going to be proficient enough.
Right. So I guess I don't see how this change. I mean, we're recognizing someone for what they're already doing in their paycheck, but we're not necessarily going to create a new resource to do this.
But we have departments that have a need to have people who are bilingual, and they don't have the ability to recruit them because there's no incentive for those people within the community to work those jobs. So adding an additional pay rate then incentivizes us to be able to hire people that have that skill set within the community.
So again, I'm just trying to understand. So I'm not against the idea, but if someone has a sheriff's officer come and deal with them in the field and they speak a different language, the chance of getting someone who speaks the correct language or their language they converse in normally happens to show up to that scene is pretty unlikely with only 325 employees.
I don't know how the sheriff does it. I know.
Let me just
You know, from EMS and conversations with EMS, if those who are bilingual, then they're radioing with them to talk to people.
That's the reality of it. If a deputy gets there and there's a language barrier and there's another deputy on duty that has the language skills, that deputy will call one over on the sheriff's coming up and he can speak for himself. But same way in any emergency service. We talked a long time about this, whether 25 cents is meaningful enough. We feel organizationally to make any kind of move toward this is a positive. I don't know that the number is significant enough to recruit people who's going to come for an extra 25 cents an hour. We had a lot of discussion about this, doing something tangible to recognize this, because our other competitors in the market are doing something with bilingual pay. And so we're trying to just take a dip into the pool here a little bit to see if it's even, we can manage it, see what our numbers look like, how many employees would actually take advantage of it. And at least when that deputy has to roll from point A to point B to do extra work, they're compensated something for that. So that's the discussion we had when we were determining whether to even bring this forward to commission or not. Sheriff, I'll let you go with what you want.
Yeah, so what the manager talked about is absolutely what happens. I will tell you, it is somewhat of a barrier recruiting individuals with the sheriff's office because they don't get language pay. The second piece of that is that currently we do have Spanish speakers spread out through the sheriff's office. They spend a lot of time not answering their calls, but going from the call to call to call to do nothing but interpret. We also do not have any Spanish speaking detectives. So those folks are brought in off the street or on overtime to do those type of interviews. We're going through the process right now on looking at how we can get those folks actually qualified per se on what they're doing. And the reason for that is court purposes. And so we're going to go through the process of testing to make sure they can read and write that language. As majority of our stuff is Spanish, but we do get, some of the other languages. When those languages happen, I can remember one was Korean. We have no Korean speakers. So we had to get an interpreter service to come to us so we could finish what we were doing. And so it is important that we have folks that speak different languages And I think this is a good step towards that, but that's how we do business right now.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Just again, I'm supportive of this, so we'll start with that. Just as I didn't even know this was on my phone, but I discovered it yesterday. There's a translation app on my phone that apparently part of the iPhone suite that's already there, and it's tremendous. I didn't need it's. If you're not familiar with it, please check it out. It does speech to text, both English to any language you can think of, and it goes the other way. So if someone else is Vietnamese, I want to speak to my phone, translates it back to English. It's a very nice tool. So we're not using that currently. We need to train people on how to use that. That might be part of the answer. Doesn't mean it solves it completely. If someone's indisposed, certainly they're not going to be able to do that very well, obviously. But I think for some situations, this might be a nice tool to have. All right, thank you.
And
Can I add something real fast? I apologize.
yes,
Um,
go ahead.
Just to add on to what Commissioner Howell just said, that might be good in a pinch if it's absolutely needed, but Google Translate does not. It's just like if we're speaking English, we all say things differently and had a different context, and there's just a lot of nuances in language that Google Translate does not pick up on. And so depending on if we were talking about Latino community, they could be from a multitude of different countries where it's their language is spoken differently in each. And so taking that into consideration, Google Translate just doesn't cut it. So I think that could work in a pinch if it's absolutely needed, but I don't think it's a valid solution going forward.
Okay, thank you. And I'm looking forward on this. I recall during our the nightmare of COVID, when we were putting out all the notices, we took an initiative to also include Vietnamese as another option because of, I can't remember this percentage breakdown of Hispanic versus Vietnamese, but if that's, as you're looking into it, maybe you consider that as well. I'm kind of with Commissioner Dennis. I'm not sure that we're going to have, I'm glad you kind of put looks like this is if everybody did this, not everybody, but all those 325. So I'm not sure that you'll get there, but it's worth the exercise. It doesn't sound like it's going to be a lot. And you verifying that, I mean, you're testing them, whatever they have to get approved.
Yes, there will be testing, and we do plan to include Vietnamese, and then we'll work with departments on any other languages. But we're working on confirming vendors that could do the service for us.
Okay. And I'm familiar with language lines in my previous somewhat life, and that can be expensive services. So maybe it may be neutral at the end of the day, quasi neutral. So, but I think you've got a consensus that everybody's saying, let's look into this further. Yeah.
So we'll continue to work and move forward on that and then bring our next steps to the commission.
Okay.
Our next item we're going to discuss is the 2024 holidays. Just as a recap, we have 11 paid holidays. We did move some things around. We added Juneteenth. That was added on November 16th. And then we took out President's Day, and then President's Day was re-added back on January 18th. So in 2023, we have these 11 holidays. And so we just need to know, how do you want us to proceed moving forward? When do you want this discussion to take place? And I know this is always part of the conversation, is how much is the cost of the holiday? And so this is the, excuse me, the salary holiday, the hourly holiday, and the total of that, the actual work that is performed. So additional costs for the holiday are roughly $169,000 for additional work that is performed on the holiday. So again, bring that back.
And we had extensive discussions on this before.
Yes.
But to remind us, we are in line with the state and the city at this point, or these 11.
The state, I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me. The state does have some different holidays, but I believe we are in line with the city of Wichita now. They also, in addition, do have a personal holiday as well.
On top of this.
On top of this, yes. So one of the things that was talked about before was the addition of having a floating holiday. And what is a floating holiday? And I simply put a definition. It's just a day that the employee can use at their discretion, of course, with supervisor approval. But if we add a floating holiday, I just want to be very clear that what that means is then we are open during that otherwise closed day that we would have. So for example, if we wanted to use a floating holiday or a discretionary day, we would be open on that federal holiday that would no longer be observed. And I know there was discussion and commissioners wanted to talk about, would that be a possibility or preferred to put in, or do you stay status quo? And so really this is your discussion for us to better understand what that would mean. Again, because we would have to configure the system to be able to put in a discretionary day or floating holiday. Just moving forward, again, don't have to have 100% agreement, but we just need to know what the will is moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I don't mean to disrupt the order, but I'm pleased with the status quo. I haven't heard anything since we've done it. I appreciate Commissioner Beatty in one of his first actions, bringing back the President's Day. And I think that was well received. And I think the floating holiday is problematic in a number of departments. And so I'm happy with the status quo, but that's, unless I hear otherwise, I'm gonna.
Yeah, I'd ask and kind of contend with my colleagues that we particularly where we're at right now, moving forward and looking forward, that I think that as much stability as we can bring without making as many adjustments, I would petition that we leave it the way it is right now. And partially is, I understand the incremental $169,000 cost that comes, but I would also say that a good portion of the employees that are impacted would have interface and cross interface when EMS goes and they're on President's Day to service a call and they're running into WPD and one WPD is being paid on a holiday time and our EMS or our fire or our sheriff's office or not. For me, a lot of this was more of a, not just a conversation of equity, it was more a conversation equally about the morale of our department. So I would be happy to have conversations in the future about making holistic changes with floating holidays and things like that. I just, from a timing standpoint, I think with everything that's stacked against the deck and compensation, I would contend that we leave it as is, and maybe we approach this a different day in a different budget. But we need to see what we have our hands on right now. That's my position.
Thank you, Commissioner Lopez.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is just another addition that we are giving our staff, and if it makes us equal or close to being equal with other government organizations, I think that's really important as well. So I would say that just leaving it would be my ideal as well.
Commissioner Dennis.
And thank you. Well, actually, the total cost is $800 and some thousand for us to add one holiday. And I objected to it before. I'm sure that I'll be outvoted, but I'll object to it if that's not.
Commissioner Al.
I think if we don't change it today or change it soon, we're going to be entrenched with the status quo. I think this is a good time to have a conversation. I think the floating holiday, again, it's something that happens in the private sector quite a lot. Some people might prefer to have Christmas Eve off or New Year's Eve off, or again, let me just say there's a lot of holidays that people value. Some people really want to take off Juneteenth. That's nothing wrong with it. That's great. I don't know what they will do on that day off necessarily. Maybe they'll celebrate that in some way, but a lot of folks are going to get off and don't know what to do with the day. They're just going to be off that day. And by the way, it could be a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. It might be in conjunction with a 3-day weekend, but maybe not. So again, I think that we ought to be asking, when we asked employees, you want another holiday? Of course, the answer was yes. That wasn't the right question. Question is, if you were to add another holiday, which would it be? You want to give up a holiday to get Juneteenth? That was never asked. We just said, you want another holiday? Of course, they said yes. And so we added that, which created the controversy. Now that we have another holiday, I'd like to go back and ask the employees once again, okay, now you have 11 holidays. Or is this the right list? Or would you like to have a floating holiday and go back to the original 10? Or would you like, I think we should talk to them. I'm not against having 11 holidays. I'm just not sure that that's the number one priority. We have 3 holidays midsummer that are 2 weeks apart. There's a holiday, 2 weeks, holiday, 2 weeks, and holiday. And I don't know that that's the right way to spread those around. And so I don't know if I like where we're at right now, but why are we not asking our employees for their input? And the question should be carefully crafted, not do you want another holiday? That was not the right question. But I'd rather change this now than let it sit, because once you let it sit, we're stuck with it. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments?
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Juneteenth is now a federally recognized holiday. And so I guess I'm just unsure of why now we're having a conversation about floating holidays when we didn't have that, at least as far as I know, prior to that. I don't think anybody's asking for holidays that in addition to that aren't federal holidays. And so I think there's an important distinction there, is that it is now a federal holiday. And because of that, we are having that conversation and adding it to our list here. So I just want to make that clarification. Thank you.
Okay. Looks like a little bit split here, but I think the consensus is that status quo. It's what I'm hearing. Okay.
Okay,
Next
thank
item.
you for that. I appreciate that direction. The last thing that we are going to talk about, and Anna's going to hand out another copy of the proposed policy. We brought this to the commission and briefed them on our paid parental leave policy in mid-February. We were able to talk with each commissioner one-on-one and get their opinion. We also relate to you that this would be minimal impact to the organization, because when finance does their budgeting, those positions are budgeted at 100%. And so what this policy is proposing is that parents who have a birth, adoption, or foster placement of a child would receive 8 weeks of paid parental leave with that. Again, minimal impact. There's this is what the state of Kansas does. There's other organizations that do this as well. We do have families that go on FML, and if they're not eligible for FML, specifically mothers who give birth, we do allow them up to 8 weeks of unpaid leave for the birth of that child. So again, this is a policy that we are proposing to increase the culture and work environment within the organization. And we just need really clear direction from the commission on what the next step should be.
Sheena, you may have, excuse me, sorry, Chairman, you may have said it. Did you quantify this? Did you say there's no quantifiable changes?
So it's very minimal. Lindsay and I have discussed this quite at length, because the positions are still budgeted at 100% that we have in there. So essentially, if an employee is out on leave, we'll still pay that employee. Yeah.
Okay, understood.
Okay, this is for discussion.
It is for discussion. And I might just add, again, you've all received copies of this, and this will be the second go around of this. But if you want us to move forward, we still have.
And the red is the addition or the corrections and additions.
Yes, we've had
to the to the current policy.
There is no policy in place right now. This
Okay.
would be a new policy.
Okay.
But we would still have to take that through our policy process, going through PRC. And then, of course, ultimately the commission does approve that. But it's still within the beginning stages and needing the commission's direction, since it's a new program that we're trying.
This would be in line with the FML world, so to speak.
So it would run concurrently with
Correct.
FML, because as FML federally states that that's just protected time. It's not necessarily paid time.
Okay. So it's not in conflict with FML.
It is not in conflict.
Commissioners, comments, questions?
Thank you, Shannon. If I already know my question.
I think I do.
I truly appreciate every parent that's foster parent. I think they're a godsend to our country. But my concern is what happens with those parents that take in a foster child for a couple weeks and then they turn them back and then they take another child for a couple weeks and they go back to some other. I don't know how we control that. And so we could have somebody that cycles through this and is constantly on FML.
Well, FML runs on a rolling year, so they would only get 12 weeks in that. Now, we also state that you're also only receiving this benefit one time in your rolling year as well. We had this conversation last time, and so I went back and did some research on what other organizations do that offer paid parental leave with the foster parents. And everything that I have found is that you encompass and welcome foster families the same way as if, you have a birth of a child or adoption of a child. You don't single that segment out as well because they are parents as well.
There's no way to limit it because if they're limited to 12 weeks a year, we could end up with somebody 12 weeks every year for the next 20 years.
And we do have foster families that do take FML. I don't know how many times they've used it. I don't have that information in front of me, but it is a right that's entitled to them.
I think that we need parental leave policy. I can't vote for it if I can't control it somehow so that we don't have someone constantly on parental leave because they decide to adopt somebody every year for a short period of time.
Well, again, they would just be limited to the 8 weeks total. Yeah.
Every year.
Potentially. If they choose to adopt or foster a child every year.
We need some guide rails, on this. And you're not putting any guide rails on it. Until we have guide rails, I can't support it.
Commissioner Lopez?
Yeah, I'm very supportive of this policy. I think it's really important. I don't mind looking into what Commissioner Dennis was mentioning on just what that could look like. But I do think it's important that we offer this because it's such an added value benefit to our staff, especially our young staff. If we're trying to recruit people to come work for our organization, this is just, it's a huge benefit. I know when I've had my other children in the past, I haven't always had 8 weeks. And I think that would have been something I would have thought was a really huge added benefit to going to a new place of work. So I think this is great. And I really hope that we can get this passed.
And
yes. Speaking of the foster care portion in particular, I understand completely what Commissioner Dennis is saying, and I think what Commissioner Lopez is saying too. The added benefit on the foster care portion for our organization, I do think there's added value, but I would also contend there's added community value to something like this. I'll remind you that we have 1,240 foster children in Sedgwick County right now. And when we poll foster families, they will tell you that one of the inhibitors of staying in the foster care space or recruiting new foster families, we only have 620 in Sedgwick County right now. That was heading into the month of April. One of the inhibitors of that is because they can't also work and provide to be a foster parent. So I do think that there is a community investment, community value for one of the bigger employers in our community, Sedgwick County, to also have a policy like this. Remember, 70% of kids that get into 4 placements in the foster care system will end up in our criminal justice system, and only 40% of them are graduating high school. So for one of the leading employers in this community to say, we welcome foster parents and we're going to make it applicable for you to work here, I do think it sends a sign. I do think there's community benefit. I understand the rub and I understand quantifying it is challenging, but I do think we have some parameters that we can work through. So, but I would be supportive of trying to work the foster care initiatives into this.
Yeah, Commissioner Howell?
Mark's still here, right? I'm just curious, do other organizations do they make it equivalent for mothers and fathers in adoptions, foster care, and birth? Is all that considered the same? Is that normal?
That's definitely the trend going that direction for sure. tradition hasn't always been that way, but yes, and most of the surveys that we see, especially with organizations who are creating a new policy or changing a policy, that is the direction it is going. Yes.
Do we know about how many, do we know what the fiscal note is on this for the county? How many of these we think we'll have in a year?
So we typically have anywhere between 50 and 60 FML cases for the birth of the child or baby bonding. I can't actually say how many we have for adoption, and foster care is even fewer that we get people having FML for that. So
I don't know if we can differentiate between the different types of children being added to the home, but let me just say cesarean birth is probably the most difficult to recover from. And I was just saying that's maybe one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum might be a foster child. I think some time off is reasonable. I don't know if it should be 8 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever the number is going to be. I don't know if we can differentiate between that. I'll say this: my wife and I have 5 kids. For several of our kids, I didn't get any time off at all. I took some vacation, but there was no paid time off. And then I think the 4th or 5th, whatever it was, it was a couple, like 2 or 3 days I was able to take off paid as a benefit to the father. The mothers at that time would get more time off. So I don't, the company did differentiate between mothers and fathers. I don't know if that's normal or not, but again, if you look at the actual time to recover, it kind of makes some sense, perhaps, that it's not just bonding time, it's actually recovery. It's a medical, you're medically recovering from what just happened. So,
and not all our families are traditional mother-father.
I understand. I would say that, again, if there's a medical recovery, I understand it being longer. That makes sense to me. If that's not the situation, I think a benefit would be reasonable. I don't know if it should be 8 weeks. I think there should be some differentiation between, bonding doesn't necessarily have to be 8 weeks. It could be 4 weeks, for example. Maybe there's another number that might make sense. So I think I like to moderate this a little bit. Thank you.
Yep.
Can I add just a little something on there, especially as we're looking at families and what families look like today? There's a lot of households where women are the primary breadwinners of families now. And so we need to make sure that whatever policy we're putting out is going to be equal for both men and women to have the same opportunities, because I don't think it's necessarily fair if we say women are the only ones who get these benefits. So I do think that's really important as we're taking these things into consideration, is that we're making that equal and fair for both parents. Thank you.
And I'm in favor of you going forward with something like this. Listening to all the comments is valuable. Maybe you can help incorporate some, I don't know if you want discipline or some guidelines that further help satisfy what we want to try to do. So, okay. Any other comments, commissioners? Commissioner Dennis?
Well, I think we pretty well covered parental leave, but I got one more that I want to make sure that we add to this entire list, and that's childcare. I said, and I've said it a lot of times, and so everybody's going to hear what I've said before. But we have a 24/7, 365 operation. And if we're trying to go out and recruit people for a 24/7, 365 operation, we need to look at the entire spectrum of possible employees across Sedgwick County. And we have a lot of people that need childcare, 24/7 childcare, if we're going to be able to have it. And we have a lot of different organizations that have the exact same issues as we do. The city of Wichita has the same issue. The hospitals have the same issue. So I don't know if we can't partner with some of these other organizations and find a way that we can provide 24/7, 365, some kind of, and I'm not saying that we provide 100% of it. It needs to be something that possibly has some kind of contribution from the county to supplement it, to get the cost down so that it's reasonable. But we need to start looking at childcare operations no matter what, I think, for the county. So I think that's one more thing that you need to take a look at. Thank you.
Okay, commissioners, anything else?
Thank you. If we are going to take a look at that, I'd rather see some type of financial benefit to these employees that need that and have it done through the private sector. I don't think we need to stand up a government-run daycare. So I think that private sector is who ought to provide that if we're going to get involved in that at all. But also, I just say this, it doesn't happen very often, but there are some parents that have 2 births per year. So that can happen.
Okay. Commissioner Lopez, any closing comments or questions?
Just want to say thank you for all the work. I mean, obviously, every year we go into budget, it's just such a tremendous amount of work that gets done. So really appreciate everybody for everything that you've done to put this together today to give us a better idea and help us make these decisions with more information. So thank you.
Okay. So Sheena, thank you. Thank you, staff, support, a lot of work. Thank you, Mark. Welcome to Wichita. Appreciate all your work. And any other questions or comments from, we've got a lot of department heads that are here. So thanks for everybody's input when asked. And Tom, you have anything to close with? Or Sheena, thanks again for everything. Tom, do you have anything? Okay. Thanks, everybody. And
And now we're back.
we're 6 minutes till 1. So we will adjourn and we'll see everybody tomorrow at County Commission meeting.
Thank you.